Context. I have a great/terrible sense of direction. The terrible. For the life of me, I can never remember road names, and barely remember man-made landmarks. You say the place I need to go to is next to the bank, on Street X. I'll be calling you an hour later, saying I'm in the next state over. The great. I can get anywhere if you give me a straight line to follow. And I don't mean follow this road, it's on the left. I mean as the crow flies. I'll use the sun or stars to get to my location, and follow that line straight on to wherever I'm supposed to go. Usually, getting there before the person who gave me directions does. Here's my story. When I was 14 or 15, can't remember which, but I know it was early high school, I missed my bus home. No big deal. I know there are 2 different ways to walk home, depending on how much effort I'm willing to give. Am I willing to give a whole fuck about getting home? Then take a left out of the exit, south-facing, and hoof it up all those hills. Only half a fuck left to give. Take a right, spend an extra half-hour walking, but it's all flat sidewalks. Both directions took me several years to figure out before I would stop getting extremely lost, to the point where I almost walked clear to the river, which is in the opposite direction of my house, multiple times. This particular early May day, I don't have a fuck to give. I don't even have half a fuck to give. This is Georgia, a state famous for having summer start in mid-March, and be up to the high 80s and 90s with 80% humidity within a week of winter ending. I was a grungy emo kid too, so you can imagine little old me, decked out in black, 2 big clothes, sweltering the second I get out of the building. I'm up at the gate, looking left at the hills and thinking, fuck that. Looking right at the rushing traffic and screaming kids. There was an elementary school less than 100 feet down the road, and thinking fuck that too. When I realize there's a third path I could take. There's a neighborhood entrance right in front of the gate, and I vaguely recognize the name on the big sign as being the same as on the road sign by a little road that led out on the main street my house was on, just a few houses down. I figure, in all my idiot glory, that there's just gotta be a straight line through this neighborhood that'll get me home before the sun boils me right out of my skin. I was wrong. There was no straight line. Following the straightest path, I hit a fence. On the other side, trees. Shitloads of trees. Stretching on into what seemed like forever. Towering and fluffed up to the lowest branches, which were still far over my head, with shrubs and thorn vines and kudzu. I decide to risk it. I hop the fence, locking my ankle in the process, which hurts worse than you'd think, and immediately try to go back. I can't. There aren't any horizontal boards on this line of the fence. Nothing to climb. I turn, check the sun to get my bearings, and march off in what I'm damn sure is the direction of my house. 2 hours later, which even with having to cross a river is still insane, I've somehow not reached my house yet. I haven't even reached the giant power plant, or whatever those power station things you see on the side of the highway are yet. I can't even hear the road anymore, or kids outside, or sirens in the distance. It's like I wandered my ass into Terabithia or some shit. Except for the low, churning industrial sound I can hear coming from up ahead. You know, the direction my house is supposed to be. I follow the sound. It's all I've got at this point. To find the factory. Or the factory, since I don't really know what it actually was. It's brick, all the way around. Small rectangular windows bordering around the near top, all of which have those metal slat shutter deals in them. 2 giant smokestacks stuck out the top of it like the old mill buildings downtown. there are no doors, at least not at ground level, and the entire thing is surrounded by dirt, trees, scrub, and kudzu, which is also overtaking part of the building's side. No asphalt, no pavement, no parking lot, no feasible way for someone to enter or leave. But still, there's this constant metal whoosh crunch movement sound emanating from the building, sort of like a cross between a running industrial dishwasher and a garbage disposal. The sun's been getting lower, so there's enough shade to tell there are lights on inside, reflecting off the metal shutter things. I get close enough to almost touch it, because I was consumed with this idea that, as long as I can touch it, it has to be real. When my ADHD ass notices, out of the corner of my eye, the very tippy tops of that power station I mentioned earlier. I hoofed it to the power station, made it to the main road, and eventually back to my house. How it gets weirder. It's been almost a decade since then. I'm 22 now, and this past spring break, which, due to my geographic location in Georgia, happens about a week later than everywhere else, I decided I want to go find that building again. I tell my roommates, I'm not friendly with them, it's just a so we can pay rent deal, that I'll be gone for the week, staying with my friends. I tell my friends whereabouts I'll be in case I don't check in one day and need to tell the cops where to find my body. I pack what would have been enough supplies for a week. Remember, I'm not good with remembering man-made landmarks. It took me over a day to find my old high school, and set off. I finally get to the same woods. Got lost in South Carolina for 15 hours. Not fun. And to that same fence I hopped, at around the same time as back in high school, and jumped it. So, it's Sunday, which is important. Day 2 of full spring break, when I jump the fence. I get a bit sentimental about being in these woods again because they're really beautiful and the sunlight filters down with a pleasant, cool breeze. Also important. There are frogs jumping and croaking, birds chittering. A squirrel pooped on me. It was like camping, except I was an idiot. I had a pair of broken sandals, a backpack full of beef jerky and Lunchables, 2 packs of smokes, my phone, an old-fashioned film camera, spin the wheel, take the picture, wait several weeks for a CVS to develop it, because I wanted pictures, goddammit. And I'm wearing holey jeans, a wife beater, and a massive hunting jacket tied around my waist, just in case. But I get overwhelmed by how nice it is outside that I camp for the night, mostly by climbing up the least ant-filled tree and wrapping up in my jacket and marking my location mentally so I can start the search in earnest in the morning. Except I am a dumbass. This is Georgia, in April. There's only one reason why the humidity would be that low with a cool, strong breeze. That reason is, April is the start of storm season, which in this specific part of Georgia is also tornado season. Monday morning. The day starts out fine. I start my trek and enjoy the weather not being hotter than the inside of Satan's ass crack, and I'm making good headway. Then the wind picks up. Then the sky goes dark. Then the rain starts, pelting down freezing, thick and grimy with city water. You know how the water cycle works, I'm not going to explain it. Then, just as I hear that distinctive, never heard it anywhere else, metal whoosh crunch movement sound, just up ahead over a moderately sized hill, it happens. Over in the distance, muffled by trees or other nature whatnot, I hear a fucking siren go off. Not police, ambulance, nor fire truck. Nope. It's the goddamn emergency weather siren. But I'm an idiot. We've established this. So I press on, because I'm pretty sure I can make it over the hill and get a picture of this place before the twister comes down and drags me off to Oz. I get so fucking close to getting over the hill when the wind turns nasty, and so strong it whips my 119-pound ass back down the hill, feeling like I've just taken a dragon kick to the face and chest. I try one more time, because I want this stupid picture, alright? I've already been lost in the fucking Palmetto State, left the city twice, and got a beetle bite on my ass. I'm so pissed off, and I'm willing to get this picture, or, as it's turning out to be very literal, die trying. That's when a minor flood comes bursting over the hill. I gave up. Hauled ass off to where I hoped the power station was. I was almost right. I ended up down the street from it, which makes even less sense, but I was trying not to get hit by, I can only assume, low-flying sheds at that point, and ran to my parents' place. Now that I'm less of an idiot, hopefully, and no longer running off the mental exhaustion caused by having 6 midterms in 3 days just before break, I'm tempted to go back and look for it. Just tempted, mind you. I looked up the city records for buildings, both commercial and residential, and nothing's listed for that area other than the power station. I've biked up and down the surrounding roads looking for signs, looking for driveways to anything that could be connected to it. The place sounds like the dam building by the river with its machine noise, but it's smack dab in the middle of the woods. So, I'm out of answers. At my work, we still use the fairly antiquated time clock that prints the time of your punch on your time card. Each time card has a small label at the top with the employee's name and the date from Monday of that week. On Mondays, the time cards are just sitting in a pile in front of the microwaves, which are right next to the time clock. Today as I came in, my time card happened to be basically right on top. Oh, great. A small victory for the day. As I picked up my time card, I noticed the card directly below mine had my exact same name on it. I remarked this to the people in the room and just thought it was a funny mistake by the girl that sets the cards up. I double-checked the card while I was talking to make sure that it was the same date and not one from last week or next week or something where the girl that sets the cards up would have accidentally made a duplicate. I picked up the duplicate time card and actually held it next to the first time card to compare the two, and they were spot on. I set it down while still talking about it. This whole ordeal took 10 seconds total, and almost immediately picked it back up to show the girl I was talking to. As I reached for it, it wasn't there anymore. The card was, but now the name was changed to another girl's name that I work with. I sifted through the pile looking for the duplicate card, but to no avail. It left me with a weird feeling all day. I had the two cards in my hands, next to each other, comparing them. I know it wasn't just a lazy brain type of issue. I made and broke eye contact with each card a few times before I set it down. That's all. Thanks for listening. I was with friends on Saturday watching the Caps play the Penguins, and we were on vacation for a music festival, so we partook in some recreational activities while we hung out in our hotel room. Before I get into the glitch, I want to state an idea that I've adopted and developed through thought and casual research. Please don't dissect what I'm about to say, as it's a general stoner idea and not a thesis on quantum mechanics. I agree with the notion that we live in a multiverse where infinite dimensions exist parallel to each other, which are organized as parallel yet slightly different timelines, infinitely. I believe that our awareness and consciousness determines which dimension we reside in. I believe that our dreams are the result of our consciousness tapping into alternate dimensions, which can explain why we experience phenomena like déjà vu. Again, I'm not making myself out to be some kind of Einstein. I think about this stuff a lot without any scientific research to go along with it. Anyway, so we were sitting in the hotel room watching the game. I had a balloon of NO2 in my hand and put it to my mouth. As I began inhaling the gas, my friend says, "Let's count down to 808, a number relating to popular 808 bass drum often found in electronic music. As the game timer approached the number, my reality became fuzzy. I became lightheaded and entered a state of euphoria. Under such circumstances, I had no interest in this countdown and completely tuned out from it. I then regained focus on reality, at which point my other friend said to me, knowing that I obsess over this subreddit, "Hey, that was like a glitch in the Matrix." I then asked her what she meant by that. She said, "We were counting down to 808, and the timer skipped it. The timer went 810, 89, 87, 86. It's totally possible that this was just a huge coincidence, but the timing of it leads me to speculate the possibility that my consciousness shifted dimensions during this second, causing me to lose a second. If anyone can find a clip of the game from Saturday night, I think it must have been the first period of the game. Not sure what network, but we were watching in Atlantic City, New Jersey." Hey there. I knew of Reddit for a couple years, but found this sub yesterday. I want to share my story with you. It happened about 8 years ago. I'm a 35-year-old anesthetist from Egypt. 8 years ago, I was working in a small hospital in the rural city of Rosetta. If you know Rosetta Stone, this is the city where they found it. The hospital's formed of 5 floors. The dormitories are on the 5th floor. The ground floor had the emergency and casualty department. Other floors have the wards, the labs, and the operative theater. At that time, the hospital was under some maintenance. On that particular day, I was on duty. There was nothing in the operative theater that afternoon, so I was in my room in the 5th floor surfing the web on my netbook. I heard some knocks on the door. It was the janitor. He told me that some new beds and wardrobes would be delivered now. He asked me to stay out of the room till they finished the replacement. I stayed in the TV room for a while when suddenly the PA system announced my name to head immediately to the ER. Before I moved, a security man came running and told me that there was a big traffic road accident that involved a school bus and that everyone available is needed. I rushed to my room, found the new furniture in place, so I closed it and ran down to the ER. When I entered the ER department, I noticed the new color of the walls. Before, it was green, but now it was blue with silver decorations everywhere. While I was helping the children, I asked a nurse when they changed the colors of the ER and if the whole hospital would have the same pattern. She looked at me confused and asked, "What new color? It was always like that." I got confused myself, but didn't pay attention to it. There were many injured children, and some of them got burns due to the bus catching fire. There were many doctors, pediatricians, surgeons, etc. A lot of them were new faces to me. I was working in the place for several years, so I knew almost everyone. I was asking myself when all these new people came. I should be more social, and I didn't expect anything bad. I was asking the people I know about the new doctors, and I was always getting the same answers. "You don't know them? How? They've been here for several years. We meet over lunch or dinner, etc." Again, I was confused, but I didn't pay much attention. Many patients were waiting for my attention. A couple of hours later, everything's fine and things begin to settle down. So I went outside the ER to get some fresh air. I won't forget what I saw. The hospital place is near the Nile, the western branch, the Rosetta branch, so that's what I usually see when I leave the hospital. But what I saw was simply the Mediterranean. Rosetta City is near the Mediterranean, but not that close. I couldn't believe my eyes. I began to look to the surrounding buildings. Some I knew, some I didn't. Now I freaked out. I remembered that I didn't recognize the ER or the new doctors. I ran inside to my colleagues and asked them about what's outside, and they told me it's the Mediterranean. I shouted, "I know that, but how did it come to here?" Everyone was confused. I kept asking, "Where am I?" My colleagues began to calm me down and tried to understand why I was panicking. I tried to call my parents using my cell phone, but they didn't answer. I wanted to call another, older anesthetist. I consider him a father and my best friend. I couldn't find his name on my phone. I really freaked out. I asked my colleagues for his phone number, and everyone told me they didn't even recognize his name. I was sure that I wasn't dreaming. I was treating children, calculating drug doses, and my mind was clear enough to know that I wasn't dreaming. I got a mental block. I didn't know what to do. I decided I'd leave the hospital at once because I needed to see my family. I ran to the 5th floor to my room to change my clothing and get my things before I left. Once I opened the door, I noticed the usual furniture. No new furniture, no new bed or wardrobe. I stood there for a moment, totally lost. Then I heard someone calling me. It was a security guard. He told me that there was a big accident that involved a lot of children, and they needed everyone down there. I just stared at him and didn't respond. He kept saying that the PA is down because of a faulty maintenance, and that's why they're calling the doctors individually. I told him I'd go down. He asked me if there was any other doctors in the dormitory. I told him I didn't know, so he went to check. I had a look outside the window, and it was the Nile and the usual scene. I went down to help. Same children, same injuries, but I was completely lost, confused, and my hands were shaking, and my legs barely carried me. My colleagues, this time the usual daily group and no new doctors, asked if I was okay and told me I was pale. The next few days were like hell to me. I had nightmares, and I wasn't able to think clearly during the day. I took a week off to calm down, and nothing similar has happened since. I wasn't on any medications at the time or under any kind of stress, and everything was clear. It wasn't dreamlike at all, I'm sure. To this day, I still remember the children and what I did to them. I only told this story to the older anesthetist, and later to my wife, because whenever I remember it, I remember the horrible feelings I had. Since everyone here is sharing their stories, I thought I'd tell it. Maybe you have an explanation. I hate this place. I work as a waiter at a pancake house, and to top it off, I work the night shift. So days that aren't Friday or Saturday are pretty much dead. So I'm standing around as normal, doing nothing because I have an 8-hour shift to kill in a small town on a finals week. A man walked in. Imagine my excitement. Someone who's hopefully going to tip me, bringing my total up to $10 in the time I've been here today. I sit him down, get his menu, a soda, and walk into the back to make sure I have enough eggs in the fridge since my chef is taking his usual nap in his car. I walk back out, and the guy's gone. I assumed he went to the bathroom, so I waited. An hour rolls by. I was worried. Did he die in there? I decided to peek into the restroom. No one. I went to the single men's stall, and it was empty. I was a little surprised, but figured he decided to leave. I was kind of sad, since I really had nothing to do and did all my side jobs. I start cleaning his table when I heard the door chime. I scrambled to the door, put on my big old fake smile, and went to talk to whoever wanted pancakes at like 9 p.m., only for it to be the same dude. I was pretty confused, but sat him down at the same spot, got him the same soda, and before he ordered, I asked him why he left out of sheer mind-numbing curiosity. He looks at me strangely and tells me, I just drove into town, or something along those lines. I figured he was just embarrassed about leaving. Maybe his card declined or something. So I took his order. Now, last time I talked to him, I told him my name, Mason, before getting his drink, and this time I told him after taking his order, to which he replied to the same way he'd replied to me the first time. May. Feminine name for a guy. I felt like someone just tossed me through a time warp. I kinda laughed like I did last time and said, yeah, it's short for Mason, before stumbling into the back to make his food. This isn't the first time something weird's happened at this pancake place. I've experienced paranormal bullshit, glitches, and met some downright weird people here. My theory is that some places are able to move in and out of a certain universe timeline, causing an attraction of glitches or strange things. My coworkers have also experienced some weird stuff I might throw up onto Reddit at some point. Anyways, this guy made a mess fit for 2, but I wanted to take 10 minutes to type this up and see if anyone had any thoughts. Maybe he did run out and was playing dumb. Maybe I'm insane. Maybe I can see the future. I don't know. All I do know is that I hate working here sometimes. This glitch happened to me during the summer holidays when I was a teenager in high school. I was hanging out with my best friend nearly every day, and we'd often wander the countryside or go out on long bicycle rides since there wasn't much else to do. One night that summer, I had an awful nightmare about us riding our bikes. In the dream, we were riding a bit too fast down the middle of the road, so when a van pulled round a corner, I couldn't stop in time and got knocked off, the impact sending me hurling towards the ground. I hit my head hard on the road and died, at which point I woke up. The next morning, my best friend called to see if I wanted to go out for a long ride. The nightmare had creeped me out, so I agreed to the ride but made my friend meet me at the shop first so I could buy a cycling helmet. He scoffed when I told him why I was buying the helmet, laughing that it was just a dream. I knew he was probably right, but bought the helmet anyway, refusing to take it off all day. I'd almost forgotten about my nightmare by the time we were biking home for dinner. We were riding fast, hungry, and eager for food, standing on our pedals and zooming down the middle of the quiet roads, my friend slightly ahead of me. As we approached a blind corner in the neighborhood close to my house, I started to get a horrid feeling. Before I could shout out to my friend to slow down a bit, a white van came speeding around the corner in the middle of the road, and I swear everything started happening in slow motion. My friend wobbled and tried to jerk his bike over to the side of the road to avoid hitting the van, but tilted over too much. His bike slid out from under him as the van driver hit his brakes. There was a thud, and everything was moving too fast again. My friend was sprawled in the road, and the shocked van driver was getting out of the vehicle to rush over. I jumped off my bike in a daze and tottered over to him, the details of my dream coming back to me. Luckily, my friend had no major injuries. The van hit the bike he'd fallen off of, and not him directly. He was getting up on his own and brushing himself down as the van driver and I joined him. My friend shot a frightened look at me, and I could tell he was also thinking about my prophetic nightmare. The van driver was frantically asking him if he was okay, but all I could say was, "It should have been me." I said it over and over. Satisfied that no one was hurt, the van driver retrieved my friend's bike from under the front of his vehicle and gave me a weird look before he drove off. My friend and I pushed our bikes slowly back to my house for dinner, and I took off my cycle helmet and put it carefully in my parents' garage. We didn't go out riding again for the rest of the summer. I hadn't thought about this incident for a while until I recently discovered this subreddit and read some similar stories by others. Could my dream have been a glitch, or a glimpse into a future where I died, which I then changed by purchasing the bike helmet? My friend and I live in different cities now, but still occasionally speak. I might contact him to see if he remembers the time that it should have been me that was killed in a cycling accident. Let me begin by saying that I made this account purely for this post. I'm not entirely sure if it belongs in this sub, so if not, feel free to remove it. I've read similar stories here, but nothing to the extent to which this affected me. I haven't been diagnosed with any mental issues, sleep-related issues, or anything that may explain any neurological-related causes, and have spoken to a psychologist in the past who gave me little explanation as to what may have caused it. But anyway, here it goes. As a child and throughout my teens, I was plagued with irregular and punishing episodes which occurred when I was about to sleep. To describe it is a very hard task, as these episodes were hard to verbally describe, which is why I found it so difficult to tell anyone, fearing that I would be diagnosed with a serious mental issue. The catalyst to cause such an episode was seemingly random and inconsistent, but it would commonly occur when reading books. Now, I could have them on perfectly normal days, and again on a stressful day, but it always began the same. Everything would warp and appear like it was expanding rapidly away from me. I'd begin to feel very lightheaded and dizzy, and I also had the sensation that my head was slightly displaced to the right. Now, this is when it becomes hard to explain. After everything had become distorted and warped, I would see random words, shapes, numbers. I can't remember exactly what they were, but it was something I could distinguish at the time, but not recall immediately after. I can't find the words to describe the sensation at all, but it was very surreal, but also very real. I told my parents of these sensations, but they put it down to childish imagination. But my father told me that I would often describe it as maths. Alongside this would be a series of verbal cues which were pretty consistent throughout all the episodes. There was a specific one which would involve my parents or someone else shouting abuse at me, saying stuff like, "Stop, you idiot." Another was someone constantly telling me to hurry up. Another would question me about random, unanswerable things. As this was happening, I would experience the feeling that I needed to run and reach something that was always too far in the distance for me to reach, or through a small gap that I couldn't fit through. If you've made it this far and declared it as a load of shit, I understand, and I would expect you to. I just thought that maybe this was a place where I could get some potential answer, but to continue. Whilst this was happening, I was conscious, but I didn't and couldn't fully stop it from happening. It was like I enjoyed the sensation, but also dreaded it and was deeply scared of it. It just seemed so real, yet I knew it was fake. I thought about it maybe being an early stage of lucid dreaming, but I've experienced that on several occasions and can clearly say that this was much more real and that I was 100% awake. Sleep paralysis could also be a potential explanation. So, there it is. My glitch? Again, if this isn't deemed glitchy enough, feel free to remove it. I'd love some closure or some answers. All my life, my mom and I have been, somehow, mentally connected. Strange little things like she would go grocery shopping and I'd sit at home thinking of how I wished for cinnamon buns and she would come home with them. Not just one isolated incident, but tons of them. My family referred to it as braining or brained. For example, Mom went to the store and OP wanted Twizzlers, and Mom brought some, so OP must have brained her. Another time, when I was about 6 or 7, as a surprise, my dad was shaving off his beard that he'd had for a long time because my mother wanted him to. But it was kept a secret and he left it to the last minute. My mom arrived home while he was still finishing it up, and I was sitting on the counter of the bathroom. He told me, "Go distract your mom for 5 minutes while I finish." So I hopped down and went to greet her. She pulled me onto her lap to say hi, and the second she touched me, she jerked her hand back like I'd shocked her. Then she looked deeply into my eyes for a second and said, "Your dad shaved his beard. I'll have to pretend to be surprised." And I was devastated, thinking somehow I'd betrayed my dad by letting her know. Not my fault we could read each other's minds. The main post here is about one particularly chilling incident that my dad has said he'll never forget. I was about 8 years old, my sister age 10. Sister and Mom went to do some errands in my mother's truck, and I was sitting outside the garage door playing in the dirt while my dad did some repairs on something or another. After a while, my dad looked up at me and said kind of to himself, "Well, it's been some time since Mom and Sister left. I wonder what's taking them so long." I didn't even look up from playing, just said casually, "It's okay, Dad. They're in the hospital. Mom will call soon, and don't worry. They're mostly okay." My dad stood there staring at me for about 30 seconds, and then the phone rang upstairs in the house. Hospital. The truck was T-boned, and Mom broke her wrist. My dad's jaw dropped. He looked at me as if I were an alien. I guess it was a strange experience for him. He packed me and my brother into his car, and we went to fetch Mom and my sister. I distinctly remember how I knew this information. There was a flash in my head, like a picture had been deposited there. It was of the hospital interior, and I just had this picture flash in my mind, and suddenly I knew all this info. Almost like it had been downloaded. It was really odd. Glitch in the Matrix, who knows? Maybe I'm psychic. I've had many other odd experiences that one could consider psychic or similar. If there's any interest, I'm happy to share. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. A little background first. Reading all these strange accounts of people finding themselves in parallel dimensions had me remembering my childhood a lot lately, and how my mother and sister always told me I have memories, which I know happened. I can recall sights, smells, sounds, and even thoughts I had pertaining to these events at the time that never really happened, according to them. This memory doesn't involve anybody but me and my dog, however, and isn't as dramatic as other dimension glitch stories I've read, but here goes. I used to spend hours every day after school in the woods around my house, as there were miles of woods in all directions except for the north. I was walking to the north, which, if you walked far enough, about half a mile, you'd reach the main highway which my driveway came off of. We had made this little journey hundreds of times before at least, and I knew exactly where I was and where I was going. I have an excellent sense of direction from years of hiking forest with no trails, and I should have been around 30 to 40 yards away from the main road, but I hadn't heard traffic in a while, and the forest kept going on until I got very uncomfortable and didn't recognize where I was, which was impossible. The woods were still and silent, almost deafeningly silent, except for our footfalls. My dog remained unusually close to me at this point in the hike, and he kept looking up at me, but I was curious and young and wanted to know where the hell I was going, so we pressed on. We came to a large oval field with beautiful green grass, which was very well taken care of. In the middle of the field was a single apple tree. At the far end of the field was a big white house with red shutters and a red door facing us, probably a quarter mile away. As soon as we reached the field, my dog took off running and barking at the tree. I tried quietly shouting at him to come back, but he was on a mission. That's when I got a horrible, heavy feeling in my stomach, and my ears began to feel as if they were burning. I had to go, and it was urgent. I called my dog a few more times, then I just said fuck it, and ran a straight line back to the recognizable woods. The strange things happen here. When I got far enough back to the point where I recognized the landscape, I began to hear traffic behind me in the direction I came. I still kept running until I reached my front yard. I swear this is the absolute truth, and I've never understood how it happened. But when I opened the front door, my dog was waiting inside for me, and I never saw him pass me by on the run back. I remained inside the rest of the day and played video games. I made several attempts to find this place over the next few years, but never could. I've gone in every direction around my house for miles, even used Google Maps trying to locate the field, but I can't find anything but forest for miles and the main road to the north. This is my first time writing this to anyone. Almost 20 years ago, I went to high school in a fairly large city. Major sports teams and never-ending population. One night when I was 16, I was driving home around 5 p.m. and there's a very busy intersection that is the artery to the freeway. That afternoon, I had an older kid at my high school make fun of me in front of my only friends. This wasn't new. By the school's definition, I was far from cool and I couldn't really stand up for myself. My mind was reliving that moment over and over again. What could I have done better? And I suddenly realized that I was driving through the red light into this insanely busy intersection. It wasn't even the light just turned red type of light run. It was red, and other rush hour cars were speeding through. In that moment, I assumed I was about to die. There were 10 cars traveling into my driver's side at 30 miles per hour, while I traveled at 45 plus. There was a brief second of everything slowing down and seeing another driver about 2 yards away from me. As I pressed the brakes, the next thing I knew, I was about a fourth of a mile away. My car was fine. No one was honking at me. Somehow, I perfectly stopped at a less busy streetlight, 2 blocks east and 1 block south of where I had been. This meant I would actually have to pass the same intersection again to get home. I rolled into a grocery store parking lot and let the adrenaline subside. The explanation I gave myself was that I hit the accelerator instead of the brakes, and my brain went into autopilot, sending me to that location. This is where things get even weirder. After accepting that my emotions and logic were on low, I decided to take the long way home. No freeway, no busy roads, no suburban substreets that I hadn't heard of pre-Google Maps. This was a horrible idea, as I was lost for a good 3 to 4 hours trying to get to my house. In the distance, I saw a car on a road. It was an accident, with a motorcycle. A high school girl backed out of her driveway too fast and sent a biker 30 yards into a subdivision entrance brick wall. The way his body was positioned, my first thought was that it was a stolen scarecrow instead of a living, breathing human being. Immediately, I went to work giving CPR to the bike rider, who didn't have a pulse. He also had a skull fracture and neck fracture that I knew I shouldn't move him. As neighbors began to flock out, they argued with me mid-CPR to move the body. The victim survived, and I even got to meet him about a year after the incident. What's weird about this glitch isn't that I'm not sure how I survived running that red light, or that I even found myself at an accident site that would have left the biker dead. I'm constantly finding myself as the first responder to deadly car accidents. What ties these accidents with my first encounter is that they always happen when I'm not on my regular day-to-day drive. They're when I take odd routes and long drives to clear my head. First, I'll share my story, and then I'll start in on the theory. Story time. I've only recently been made aware of the theories circulating about our reality having been altered, but I think I might know when it happened. I remember it very clearly, because it was the moment everything changed for me. I was in my sophomore year of high school, and doing better, academically, than I'd ever bothered to do before. Prior to this school, I had grown up as the youngest of 6 siblings in a hick town where everyone's future was pretty much the same. Go to school, play football, never do well enough to get noticed, work at the paper mill, drink away your problems, and die. It was a pretty bleak existence, which is why in the summer of 2003, just before the start of my freshman year, when I had the option to move 2 countries away and live with my sister in order to attend a better school, like, oh wow, this place had computers better, I jumped at it. My sister, her husband, their 2 toddlers, and myself had all gone along swimmingly with each other, and I was a decently happy teen. But somewhere around mid-January 2015, everything changed. I remember walking into my study hall class, which, thanks to block scheduling, was more than an hour every other day, sitting down next to a buddy of mine, and then class change bell ringing. When I expressed my confusion, my buddy assured me that I'd spent all of study hall staring off into space and wouldn't respond to him at all. He said he'd started to get nervous that there might be something wrong with me, but guessed that I was just really caught up in some sort of daydream. 2 other classmates validated his story, and I spent the whole rest of my day deeply concerned as to how I could have lost so much time in the blink of an eye. Still to this day, I've never fainted or blacked out, so it was really disturbing. But it didn't end there. When my sister came home later that afternoon, I tried to tell her about it, but she snapped at me, saying something to the effect of how she didn't have the patience to put up with any stupid bullshit. Which is strange, as we'd always gotten along rather famously. Over the course of the next 3 weeks, every social truth I'd known would break. My sister and her husband divorced, I was kicked out of the house and forced to move in with my mother, and perhaps most disturbingly, my guidance counselor at school had no clue who I was. None. I remember thinking it was a joke, as she'd been the reason I was put into English honors, and at the beginning of January, we'd been discussing AP classes, the possibility of early graduation, and what I could do to avoid having to participate in gym. The previous winter, that same guidance counselor had pulled a bunch of us who'd been friends with Omar, who was shot and killed at a car wash in town, to see if we needed any help coping. So, this guidance counselor and I definitely had a history. But suddenly, there was nothing. It took me years, literally years, to get over that one. That left me estranged to my sister, academically ruined, my credits didn't transfer to the new district, and I was set back to my freshman year, which I was then forced to repeat because I officially started that year in February, and feeling alone in the universe. Now here's my theory. I think something happened in January of 2005. Not just to me, but to all of us, or at the very least most of us. The deeper I dig into this, and the more of these glitches and Mandela effect stories I read, the more often 2005 is mentioned. Perhaps most notably, it's the furthest back you can find reference to the Berenstein and Berenstein bears on any of the publishers' websites. But look out for it and you'll see what I mean. I think we might be dealing with some sort of global-scale quantum suicide, quantum immortality style event, with a trigger in mid-January 2005. So, this story isn't that special, just something that happened to me a few years ago on the way to work. The job I had required me to leave my house around 5:30 a.m. I'd been working there for a year and was used to being up that early. When I got to the corner of my street, I looked to the left, into the backyard of another house's street. This house faced the other street and has no houses that block my line of sight. The yard was small, but right in the middle of it was a purple light. It was a filled-in rectangle shape, completely made of light that was about the size of a door. It was about as bright as a phone screen on maximum settings. It didn't fade in and out like a reflection. There was nothing behind it for the light to be projected onto. No source for it either that I could see. Nothing. Just a purple, glowing light floating in the middle of someone's yard. I sat there for nearly 10 minutes trying to figure out anything about it. As the sun came up and brightened the sky, the light remained unchanged. At this point, I was going to be late for work, so I just drove away. I still have no idea what it was. Hey guys, I'm kinda new to Reddit, but something really bizarre happened to me, and it seems like this sub is really the perfect place to put it. When I found it, I immediately thought of this shit, and I've been fighting with myself about posting it. More on that later, I guess. First of all, I've been to therapists and psychiatrists for all my life, have always been mentally ill, and I hallucinate a lot. I've never once not been able to tell when I was hallucinating. I'm well acquainted with my own brain and its little bitch fits. And it's only ever like demons and shit. I honestly don't think whatever this freaky-ass string of events could be is me having some ridiculously long psychotic break, especially because I don't feel weird and everything else was normal at the time. Anyways, what happened was this. 2 or 3 years ago, one of my classmates got in a seriously fucking stupid car race on the way to school with 2 other people in his car. He crashed it into a telephone pole and was tragically killed, along with the other 2 boys in the car. I remember it really clearly. My grandma came over the next day with the newspaper and comforted me because, well, I was genuinely distraught. The boy who was driving I barely knew and had never seen before, but I distinctly remember the 2 others who were in my grade and in many of my classes. My dad and I talked about them. I talked with my friends on Facebook about it, some of them having been a lot closer to them than me. Checking back on those conversations afterward showed they were a lot more vague than what I remember, and none of us ever specified who died. Don't think I ever checked the newspaper, but I'll try to find an article online and tell you guys what it says later. The way we found out was really public. There was a huge announcement from the principal at the beginning of school over the loudspeaker where he told us the names of the deceased, and we had a moment of silence. People talked about it for weeks. And since I've gone out of my way to tell you about my hallucinations and how much of an impact this event had, I'm sure you already know what I'm about to say. But, actually living it? It's so different. It's fucking weird. So, yeah, one day I woke up, went to school, and the 2 other boys were there. Totally alive. Pretty busted up, but the same popular little assholes they'd always been. I didn't even like these guys, and I almost got teary-eyed. The other boy was still gone. I even overheard them telling their story a bunch of times. I don't think either one of them even passed out. No injuries beyond broken bones. No way they could have been mistaken for dead. No way the principal would have announced they were dead, realized he was wrong, and not made an apology to correct it. I thought that I must have been the one who was wrong and just let it go. I don't know. That feels like the weirdest part. I never just let things go like that. I've been reading a lot of these threads in preparation for posting this, and the theme of I didn't want to look weird so I let it go always makes me cry bullshit and get annoyed, but now that I think about it, I don't know. Maybe it's a mechanism by the aliens to keep us from investigating. It's just, I've never felt genuinely embarrassed about talking about something weird like this. I'll recite a list of every diagnosed mental disorder I have to a complete stranger, but it literally took me years to build up the courage to even think about this maybe being a real experience. I'm still embarrassed. I didn't even want to specify what little I did, out of fear they'd find this and get pissed that I might be trying to get attention from something so terrible. But I swear, I'm not. Maybe it's just because a boy died. Maybe it's because there's a part of me that's afraid that pointing it out for the first time is going to get them hurt. Maybe it's because I'm having trouble admitting that my brain might be so messed up that it conjured up all this shit. I don't know. Writing this is making me terrified. I also decided to type it up at the worst possible time, 9 a.m., and for some reason it's foggy as shit outside, and it's never foggy here. No birds. There are always birds. Honestly, it's like Silent Hill, but hot. Don't know why it's scaring me so bad. I don't know. Glitches have happened to me a couple times, but it's only ever been real tiny shit. This was huge, and it feels like something is telling me not to post it. My hands are even shaking. I don't know. It's weird as hell. I want to paint this picture as accurately as possible, just because I have absolutely no idea how it happened and need help brainstorming what happened. It's nothing too crazy, but it left me completely dumbfounded. I've been borrowing my dad's Jeep for this summer because we had to sell the car I had. This Jeep has keys where you can lock and unlock with buttons on the keys. Pretty standard, but I never had that before. So, because it's a new feature, I use it a lot. I live in a wonderful area, in a small town, so I never really have any reason to lock my car doors. But like I said, it was a new feature for me, so for the last couple days I've been locking and unlocking my car with the key buttons. I was just getting off work as a server, and I was approaching the car. In my right hands are the keys. 10 feet away from the car, I press the unlock button and unlock the doors. I open the door with my left hand, meanwhile, never letting go of the keys. Swear on my life that I didn't open my right hand even. I sit down, without doing anything else. I reach with my right hand, with the keys, to put into the ignition to start the car. I do it every day, and I'm sure everyone does the exact same. Except when I reached with my hand, the keys weren't in them. I was like, wait, what? I never even opened my hand. I don't have to look for long before I see the keys sitting right next to me in the passenger seat. Now, I don't really like to put things in the passenger seat in the car for two reasons. One, whenever I put anything there, it'll slide all over the place when I drive around, so I keep things in the center console instead. Second, I keep the car very clean because, like I said, it's my dad's, and I treat it well. I sat there for a solid 5 minutes trying to figure out how they got there, because I was positive they were in my hand. I know this isn't really anything huge or totally crazy, but I don't see any possible way it happened. The keys couldn't have been there before, because I had to use them to unlock the car in the first place. It's very uncharacteristic of me to put anything on the seat, and I still maintain that I never let go of the keys. I was in a hurry to leave because, fuck being a server, and me sitting down and reaching for the ignition was a continuous single motion. I don't know how it happened, and it didn't really creep me out. It just left me dumbfounded. I found this sub from Ask Reddit today, and this happened about 3 days ago, and I figure it belongs here. What do you guys think happened? Because I have no clue. This is quite an old event that happened to me, but I thought I'd share it here, since it fascinates me and really makes you think. It happened back when I was in middle school, but I still remember it like yesterday. I was at home, approaching bedtime, about 10 p.m. My mom was in my bedroom putting some of my clothing away, and my dad was in the opposite far corner of the house, in a chair reading a magazine. I said something to my mom like, "Where are you? Are you in my room?" She answered, "I'm over here," from my room, and so I started to walk over. I walked out of the kitchen and took 2 steps into the hallway leading to the bedrooms, when I heard an absolutely terrible crashing sound coming from our garage, and it was loud. The sound lasted about 3 seconds. I thought the garage just exploded. I've never to this day been so scared. I tried to scream, but ended up making a sound I didn't know I could make, like a coughing yell, because my throat tightened up so much. I just sprinted out of the hallway, back through the kitchen, to the living room where my dad was sitting, quietly reading. I tried to scream to my dad to say what I heard, but all that came out was that weird yelling coughing sound. He just looked at me like, "What the heck happened to you?" After about 30 seconds, though still shaking, I could finally talk again and said, "Something happened in the garage." He just looked at me puzzled. Again, I said, "Didn't you hear that? Something just crashed in our garage." He said, "What?" I didn't hear anything, but got up to take a look in the garage for me. I wasn't about to go in there. I didn't know what he'd find. I waited at the edge of the hallway, just barely peeking to where I could see in the garage, while calling to my mom to ask if she heard it too. My dad came back inside in 5 seconds and said, "Everything's fine. What did you say you heard?" My mom also said she didn't hear anything, even though my bedroom shares a wall with the garage. I asked my dad to look again, and my mom went to look around too. I even asked my dad to look in the attic, and finally, I poked my head into the garage too. Everything looked normal. I kept telling my parents what I heard, and they saw I was terrified, but they brushed off the event. "Maybe you just heard a rake or shovel slip off the hook or something." I know what I heard, and it was something big. It took me about an hour to calm down enough to even stop shaking, and another 2 to 3 hours to be able to go to bed. A month or so later, I'm asleep in my bed, a little after midnight. Suddenly, I'm jolted awake by a horrible, loud crashing sound. The same sound that I heard before walking in the hallway. In what felt like about 3 seconds, my mom ran into the room and turned on the light, and my dad came in right after. We all heard the sound this time. My mom's expression said it all. All around me, on my bed and on the floor, were pieces of insulation and chunks of plaster. I was miraculously untouched by anything. My bed had been pushed about 3 feet farther into my room, and up against it was the hood of our car. My dad ran to the garage, and I got up and followed him there, once again shaking, though not as badly as the first time around. What we saw inside was an awful mess. Our car was completely crumpled in the rear, and was pushed through the workbench, our bicycles, and the wall, and into my bedroom. Another car had crashed into our garage. I'm absolutely convinced that I heard the accident happen a month before it actually happened. Therefore, this means that the event already existed, already happened, when I heard it in my head the first time. And this kind of thing has to be all or nothing, where if one thing in the future already happened, that it implies that everything has already happened. We just haven't reached the condition in time to perceive it yet. I truly have no idea as to the mechanism by which this occurred. I just know that it did, and would love to understand how. I'm not sure if this subreddit is where this story should belong, but I'm sorry if it isn't. I'd also like to preface this by saying I recognize that this could all very well be a strange coincidence, but it's still odd nonetheless. When I was 7, my grandmother died. Her name was Audrey. She was sometimes called Auntie. When I was 10, my brother's best friend died at the age of 26. He was close with our family, like a second son. My grandmother knew him too before she passed. When I was 13, 3 years after he died, my father and I went to visit his grave. My mom stayed home. We visited every so often. My grandmother wasn't buried in the same place as him. We kept her ashes at our home. So we park and I get out of the car. His gravestone isn't far from where we parked at all. Immediately after stepping out, I step on a small red and pink book that's in between the grass of the cemetery and the concrete where we parked. Kind of in a very weird place. It seemed like it was placed perfectly so I would find it. I pick it up. It's called God's Little Devotional Book for Moms. My dad and I thought it was cute and that we should bring it home to my mom. Nobody was around and we waited to see if someone would come by for it, but nobody did. We visit his grave for a while and head home. I bring my mom the book we found and she likes it. It's filled with daily mantras and sayings and stuff like that. Then I look on the first page of it and there's writing in pen on it. It says, "To Tammy, all my love, Auntie." I find this weird because Tammy is my mother's name and that's how she spells it too. We're a little perplexed by this for a few moments when my mom says that she recognizes that handwriting. It's my grandmother's. We go out and get several cards my grandmother had sent us and letters she'd written to check and see if they match. And yes, to a T, that is her handwriting. Also addressing herself Auntie, like how people always used to call her. My grandmother had been dead for 6 years at this point. I have no idea how it happened. This happened probably 9 years ago, making me 11. I was at a local laser tag arena and arcade with a friend's family. We frequented this location and it's never been known for bad cell phone signal or anything, so reaching someone was a breeze. I wasn't lucky enough to have a cell phone at the time, so I used my friend's dad's phone to call my mom at home. I found her name and number saved into the phone and called to ask if it would be okay to have a sleepover at the friend's house. She picked up and I said my usual, "Hi, Mom, can I," speech, expecting a, "Sure, love you." But she said, "You must have the wrong number," and hung up. I checked the number and it's indeed the correct number. I call again. Same response. Check again and call once more, and this time she picks up. I'm kind of panicked and ask her what's been happening when I call, and she seems confused and says I haven't called. I brush it off and ask my favor, to which she says yes. I check the outgoing calls, and there are 3 dialed calls to my home number. I was pretty shaken, but was young and didn't understand what may have been happening. It was her. It was her voice, and it was our number. I didn't know it at the time, but now I know that I glitched. And it scares me more than ever. I lived in the Philippines until I was 8 years old, and as a child, I only had a few friends. It wasn't hard for me to leave them when I moved to another country because most of my friends were only classmates. We never hanged out after school because we all lived so far away from each other, so we never really got that close. Fast forward almost 10 years later, and I suddenly received tons of friend requests on Facebook from people who went to the same school as me in the Philippines. At first, I thought it was nice of them to remember me, especially since it's been so long. But after thinking about it, I found it quite strange that they all suddenly remembered me and found me on Facebook. Also, my name is very difficult to remember as I have a Vietnamese name, and people knew me by my nickname. I also know that, even then, my friends never really knew my full, real name, so I'm not sure how they found me. To get to the point, because of this happening, I started to think about my old friends, and I remembered this one girl that I was really good friends with. Before we met, I didn't even notice we went to the same class, but I guess that's due to us being 35 students in one class. She bumped into me while I was going to the bathroom, and since then, we started talking to each other. We used to hang out every break, and we ate our lunches together. After a while, we became best friends, and she invited me over to her place. I was so excited when she invited me because I've always wanted to hang out after school with friends, and luckily enough, she lived really close to the school. I remember me entering this old apartment complex and being really surprised about how poor she was. The school I attended was a private international school, and most of the students were rich and could afford it. I guess she was one of those students where her parents sacrificed all they had to let her attend a good school. Her parents were super nice, though. This particular memory stuck quite well with me because I remember her dad running out to buy a bottle of Coke since he was so happy I was there. I guess his daughter didn't have friends because, now that I think about it, I never saw her talking to anyone other than teachers. The next thing I remember was that I started doing homework with her and suddenly my dad came and knocked furiously at their door. I didn't have a phone at that time, and I just went to her place without saying anything, and I'm pretty sure he was scared shitless because kidnappings were common, especially around my school area. I didn't have time to explain myself, and my dad just grabbed my stuff and carried me out while shouting at me. My friend suddenly stopped talking to me after that incident, and she pretty much started ignoring me, and, well, I could understand why. Suddenly, a year later after forgetting about her, I noticed she was never at school anymore. I questioned my teachers and my classmates. They all said they didn't know anything about her, and everyone just gave me funny looks. It was as if she was forgotten by everyone. During this time period, my family was going to move to Norway, so I wanted to say goodbye and sorry to her, so I kinda got obsessed with finding her. I visited her apartment once again, but a different family lived in it, and when I asked about her, they said they lived there for 20 years and had never met her. I even asked my dad about the incident, and he says he remembers being mad at me and that he carried me out somewhere, but other than that, couldn't remember anything. My mom remembers me talking about a person all the time when I was younger, but she couldn't really remember who. I couldn't really do much about it before we left, and I guess I myself forgot about her until recently. Yesterday, I went through all my yearbooks and pictures, but I couldn't find her anywhere. I don't even remember her name anymore. I also messaged my past classmates, and they don't know anything about her either. I'm really confused now because I still have a necklace made out of beads that she gave me, so I have proof she existed. The weird thing is, while I was thinking about her, I remembered a guy in my class who I had a crush on, and we talked a lot to each other, and I can't find him anywhere either, and wouldn't you guess, nobody remembers him. My grandmother is a quack doctor, witch doctor, and she said when I was younger I cried a lot because I saw spirits, and she said they kept on annoying me and latched onto me so that she had to make me charms to ward the spirits off me. I talked with her, and her only explanation is that they were spirits who wanted to be my friends. I don't really believe in the supernatural. Sorry about my language. English isn't my first language, so I hope you understand. Even though I was sick at the time, I'm considering this an everyday mode experience, because I have a direct experimental witness, and, to be honest, sick was pretty much my norm at the time. Also, this is long, because I wanted to express how clear and very real every interaction truly was to us. This is something that happened to me and my husband several years ago that still comes up sometimes as a, "Hey, remember how super weird and off-putting this experience was?" conversation. We've historically called it the ghost doctor incident, but after reading through this sub for a bit today, I think it's more glitchy than ghosty. This happened several years ago. Initial guess was wrong. It was closer to 8 to 9 years ago. So, 8 to 9 years ago, we needed to make appointments for each of us to see a doctor, as I had ignored some symptoms for a while. Turned out to be related to an allergy. Nothing neurological or psychological, since I've seen that theory tossed around and do believe it to be a plausible explanation for a fair amount of glitches. I wanted to make sure to mention that. And my husband has a chronic condition that requires daily medication and yearly blood panels. Also not neurological or psychological in nature. He still had a few months left on his medication, so I was to go first with the new doctor. I went online, found a nearby doctor that would take us on, and made an appointment over the phone. Boring, mundane adulting so far, right? The day of the appointment, we arrived at the slightly run-down-looking complex of offices. We were young, had little money, and this was the kind of doctor we could afford at the time. We were worried about finding the right door, but were able to quickly because it turned out to be well labeled. We sat in the waiting room for a while, talking to the very friendly Hispanic reception nurse here and there. She noticed that I was going over a list I'd made of the symptoms that had been concerning me, one of which was a small lump on the side of my neck that had gotten worse after a cold and was very troubling. There was something about the way that she told me not to be worried that helped me relax. She was just a super nice woman, the kind of warm, mommy vibe all of my favorite nurses had ever had. This is why I remember her so vividly. After a while, the super nice reception nurse led us back to the exam room. The exam room was, to be blunt, freaking weird. It was half storage space, half exam room, with a bookshelf full of cardboard file boxes next to the normal exam-y doctor stuff. The doctor came in, and he was a tallish, middle-aged African-American man with a short afro. He was nice enough, but rather impatient. I was somewhat annoyed, but chalked it up to being a first meeting, and I was being insistent about going over each symptom in detail. He told me what another doctor had about most of what I had going on. The allergy I have is difficult to diagnose in adults. And then we came to the neck lump. Scar tissue from chronic ear infections, he told me, palpating the area. Nothing to worry about, he told me. He prescribed me an antibiotic for another symptom and sent me on my way, asking me to make a follow-up appointment for after the pills were done to see if I needed additional tests and treatment. Now, I went into that much detail because I've talked to other doctors since then about the scar tissue and gotten the same answer. Also, for another reason I'll circle around to at the end. I filled the prescription, took the pills, and waited for my follow-up appointment. The day of my appointment, my husband and I arrive at the rundown grouping of offices as we had before. Go up to the door we remembered going to the first time, and there's no visible label and it's locked. Where the doors had been labeled looked like they hadn't been recently painted over or scratched off. The windows were all covered up. The place was entirely deserted. Weird, we thought, but decided to try walking around to the back of the building. Maybe the nurse was at lunch, or that door wasn't open that day for whatever reason. We found the back door. Same thing. Door locked. No signs, no doctor's office. I tried calling, but there was no answer at the number I'd used to make the initial appointment. No voicemail, no disconnected message, just endless ringing and ringing. I couldn't find the internet listing I'd pulled up in my search that directed me to the office, couldn't find any evidence that there'd ever been a doctor there at all. As far as I can tell, there are a few explanations to the doctor's office that wasn't. They may have been some kind of really sketchy not docs that fled, but there were no news stories of anything like that in my area. Also, I'd been complaining of severe stomach and body pain, which ended up being related to my allergy, and most pill mill docs would have quickly handed over a pain pill prescription. This doctor, however, was cautious, and didn't want to treat the pain without knowing what was causing it. Very detailed residual haunting, but if that were the case, I'd have found some record of that doctor having existed at that address. Back then, when looking into this, I had his name handy. Matrix/reality/universe glitch. As I said, I know there are details I'm forgetting or want to confirm with my husband, so I'll post an update after I talk to him. Update. I asked my husband if he remembered the doctor who wasn't when he came home. Our roommate was in the room. He doesn't know the story, so I actually got to hear it the way he tells it. Perfect. He has no idea what this man's name was, though, as he was talking, the name smacked me over the head, so I'm going to sleuth tomorrow. I'm kind of in the let's find a normal explanation frame of mind now. Anyway, my husband corroborated my telling of it, but didn't mention whether or not he was examined or had blood work done. According to him, the office was obviously being renovated, and there was a daycare next door where there is now a well-established, long-running maid service chain's office. He was adamant about the office unit being entirely abandoned, and that it felt off. He also confirmed where it was, exactly. Fun fact, we moved to an apartment across the street without realizing it roughly 2 years after the experience. He remembered that, which jogged my memory. I'd purposely not thought about it because it was too weird, or maybe just stopped caring for a while. Anyways, now I have the general address, what I think is the doc's last name, and a desire to find an explanation. Update 2. So, just a couple of things. First, my husband did get examined, had blood work done, and received a month of his meds. He has no clear impressions from the exam, so it was routine. He did tell me he was able to look in a couple windows that day and that the place looked like it had been abandoned for a while, but that it looked like a deserted sales office on the inside with desks, chairs, and the like where a waiting room and play area had been. Lastly, I remembered the doc's name, and as soon as I said it, I got a "yes, exactly" from my husband. We looked up the name. Nothing resembling that doctor even a little bit. when work gets slow today, I've got a few things to research. This is my first time on this subreddit. Found it via the random button up top, but reading through some posts, I think this story fits. It happened to a friend of mine, so I don't have all the details, but I know enough about it to feel comfortable sharing. I've known my friend, who we'll call Aaron, since preschool. We went to the same preschool, and our mothers became friends, so we were able to hang out a lot as children, despite not going to the same elementary school and living several miles apart. During preschool, he cut himself somewhat badly on a chunk of broken glass from a vase that got knocked over. That gave him a nice scar on his inner forearm that was around 4 inches long, half an inch wide. It was a pretty distinctive scar, even years after the fact. Kid Aaron goes to the hospital for stitches. Fast forward to 2013. He's 20, and driving home one night on a road he doesn't normally take home due to a road closure. He's going too fast, comes up to a sharp corner, and rolls his vehicle, which is a green, smallish SUV. I don't recall the exact make. The SUV crashes into a tree on the side of the road, completely caving in the roof over the front seat. He probably had less than half the space he originally had, nowhere near enough for him to fit in the front seat. Aaron simply pushes open the door to the SUV and climbs out, without so much as a scratch on him, not even a rip in his clothes. He fishes out his cell phone, which is likewise undamaged, and calls his grandmother for help. He gets checked out by paramedics that arrive, and gets the all clear. He's telling me this about a week or so later when I come to visit. I live 2 hours away from him now. I notice that he doesn't have the scar on his arm. Location: Doge's Palace, Venice, Italy. Time: summer of 1997, and somewhere around the 1500s. What happened? Transported/temporarily slipped through time. So I was a U.S. Air Force brat, military dependent. Father was enlisted in the Air Force, living in Germany, and had traveled to Venice with my family during summer vacation. I encountered a lot of new things, like riding the train into Venice, gondolas, Italian architecture, and a brief stint in 1400s and 1600s Doge's Palace. Myself, my mother, father, and my uncle's family were touring the city, and we wound up at Doge's Palace following behind a tour group and just meandering around the grounds. We walked into a large room that was referred to as the courtroom. It was about the size of an indoor basketball court, and I remember that the tour guide mentioned something about the scandalous and deadly events that took place there. I think he was talking about Marino Faliero at the time. Anyway, I remember looking at the back of my mother's head and then doing a survey of the room. It was really crowded with tourists, and there were bright lamps and wall lights everywhere. There was the sea of noise from multiple ethnic and culture groups intermingling together. Anyone who's been to international touristy places knows the loud murmur of multiple dialects and languages being spoken at once. As soon as my vision broke away from the back of my mother's head, she instantaneously disappeared, as did the murmur of the people. In my peripheral vision, I could see a vast difference in the amount of light being cast into the room, and the change in light temperature and hues. Everything was suddenly muted and flickering. The room had the same dimensions and the same general layout, but suddenly any and all signs of modern society had simply vanished. The whole room suddenly had a very different feeling about it. A heaviness, an air of hostility took over the room. It was menacing and dark, unlike the current state of light and airy. I could see the soot patterns on the room and the torches casting a faint trail of it skyward towards the ceiling. Something about the light and shadows stands out about this encounter more than anything else I remember. The transition from modern day to the past was nearly instant, however slow enough to process the fact that something was changing, much like someone walking past a doorway and casting a shadow over a room. In this temporal instance of time dilation or whatever, I could see people, 2 guards with pike-like weapons standing by one of the doorways. I could clearly see skeletal structure of the room, as if someone peeled back the opulence from the walls and ceiling. The throne was still where it was in modern times, but everything else about the room seemed vacant. I began to pivot in order to double-check that I was in the right place and not lost, the whole time soaking in the visual and auditory surroundings. I could hear someone walking down the hall towards the doorway with the 2 guards posted by it. I could hear that hollow echo of each footstep as it echoed off the bare walls, floor, and ceiling in this large open space. The cadence of the footsteps had a sense of purpose and confidence that implied that they belonged there. As I was still pivoting around to see what the hell was going on, I locked eyes with the man whose footsteps I could hear approaching. He stopped in the doorway and locked eyes with me for a brief second as if I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I immediately got the impression that he wasn't sure what to think of me either. I remember him having a mustache, trimmed but not precise, deep, dark brown eyes, and a pursed mouth. At this point, we're talking about 15 to 20 seconds of time has elapsed since I saw the back of my mother's head leave my sight. I could feel the adrenaline gearing up and the fight-or-flight response getting ready to launch. I figured that I wasn't sure what was going on, but I didn't think I wanted to stick around to find out what that guy thought about my presence either. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder and snapped around quickly to confront whatever. It was my mother. Before I could process the information feeding from my eyes to my brain, I was suddenly back in the brightly lit, loud, busy room I was just in before these events. It was like the way a TV displays an image and then redraws the screen. 1 millisecond, I was a couple of 100 years in the past. In the next millisecond, I was right back in modern time. My mother had a puzzled look on her face and asked me, "Where did you go?" That about caused me to shit myself. My mother was referring to the fact that I, apparently, suddenly stopped in mid-movement in the room and just seemingly checked out for a second. I told her what I just experienced. She, being a very religious person, attributed it to the devil and evil spirits and just kind of moved on. I was bewildered and immediately left the area and waited for everyone else to finish their tour of the place while I waited outside, questioning reality for an hour. To this day, I have no fucking idea what happened, and I'm barely able to describe the experience with any degree of precision that does it justice. I had a few unsolved mysteries moments while living in Europe, but this one was leaps and bounds above the rest. I suppose that with my active imagination, passive environmental observations, and power of suggestion, I could have just had a funky brain fart moment. But vividness and time-lapse were so visceral. I don't openly advertise this, and while I find the paranormal an interesting subject, I don't believe any of it. This is the closest experience I've had with something that could potentially change those beliefs. I've had strange, creepy, and/or just plain cool things happen randomly all my life. Here's one I think may just fit in the Glitch in the Matrix forum. This has been happening for years now. Maybe longer, but it only came to our attention maybe 6 years ago. A little bit of backstory. My mother and I have a very close bond, close enough to have our own telepathy that normally comes when people know each other so well that they either think the same thing or know what the other will say or think in a certain situation. We also have a habit of telling each other about any strange dreams we had the night before, whether they be dreams about dancing fruit or just truly weird dreams about the apocalypse or dead relatives. As for our glitch, I recall one night I was wearing headphones and reading on my Nook when I suddenly jumped up, startled from hearing my mom yelling for me. This wasn't totally unheard of. She would call for me if she simply needed help reaching something in a tall cabinet, so I didn't hop up and run to check on her or anything. I simply removed a headphone and listened for a second shout. When I felt it was safe to go back to my music, I did so, racking it up as my tired brain playing tricks that I was too lazy to pay attention to. I was a teenager, after all. After a while, it happened again. And again, there was no immediate second shout, so I finally removed my rump from my bed, disentangled my legs from my blankets, and got up to check. Rather reluctantly, I might add, seeing as it was 3 a.m. and I could possibly be bitched out for being up so late on a school night. I made it to her room to find her sleeping. I let it go because it wasn't the first time that it happened, and I knew it probably wouldn't be the last. I've always heard or seen strange things at night, and I've always just chalked it up to be an overactive imagination sucking up the leftover energy and creativity nobody else in the vicinity was using. The next day after school and work, as per our usual routine, my mom shared her previous night's dreams while we were cooking dinner. She told me of her dream about how I was somehow younger, maybe 3 or 4, and I wasn't listening to her. This is the sort of recurring dream of hers. Apparently, I don't listen to her in any of her dreams. Maybe it's a secret fear. Seeing as I'm not surprised by the contents of her dreams, I don't reply and let her go on. She goes on to tell me how I separated from her in a store and how all she could think was just to keep yelling my name like any parent would in that situation. She said she distinctly remembers just standing and screaming my name over and over, but she couldn't find me. I didn't find any of this surprising or even relatively entertaining until she told me how it woke her up enough to come check on me. She said she found me with my headphones still in my ears and glasses still on my face, so she did the normal motherly thing to do and removed the objects. She also remembered noting at the time that it was about 3:30 in the morning. I should mention that my mother and I are huge believers in the paranormal and have a great love for all things inexplicable. It makes us happy to know that there's more than just what we know out there. So, as you can imagine, upon telling her of my experience that night, it didn't take long to come to a consensus that I had heard her screaming in her dream. Strangely enough, it still makes me smile every time I think about it. So I moved into this studio apartment about 5 months ago. It's part of a complex of 4 buildings, each with 4 to 8 apartments, depending on the building. Anyway, I never really noticed anything strange for a while. I would see residents during the day, either leaving or returning from work or errands, maybe walking to the dumpster to throw something away. However, only recently has a realization crept up on me. I used to get home late for work, usually around 11:30 or so I'd get home, and I started noticing that nobody had their lights on. No windows lit up. I figured everyone went to bed or something. Then I changed jobs and would get home much earlier. No one uses their lights. Ever. I don't get it. I make dinner and take out some trash, and my windows are the only ones illuminated. I feel like I'm the only one here at night. I mean, there are still cars in the parking lot, but no one is out or making noise. I almost feel like I'm being pranked. Either everyone here has night vision, or they're all lame and go to bed when the sun goes down. Or no one else actually lives here at all. Hey folks, this literally happened just a few minutes ago and I'm thoroughly confused. I just boarded the C bus in my hometown, basically a mini ferry across an inlet that separates downtown from the northern shore, and I had the window seat I wanted sniped by a young Asian man in a blue and white raincoat. I opted to sit further down the aisle, and after about 2 minutes I looked back over at the man by the window. What was a mid-20s Asian man with black hair had become a late 60s Caucasian man with snow-white hair. Weird thing is, they were both wearing the exact same jacket and were sat in the same pose on their phones. I've walked around the whole C-bus to find the Asian man, and he isn't here. There's no way he got off either. The doors had already closed when he sat by the window. So, am I crazy, or did I just experience a glitch in the Matrix? Back in the early 80s, I had moved across country but was still in close contact with my BFF who had stayed in the old state. We talked on the landline every couple of weeks and wrote actual letters to each other via snail mail. Yeah, these were the dark ages. One day, I had slept late and was still laying in bed like a lazy young person I was, taking my time getting up to do whatever it was I was doing those days. I closed my eyes, thinking maybe I could go back to sleep even though I was pretty much wide awake. All of a sudden, behind my eyes and in my mind, I was flying in the air. But I wasn't flying in the air where my body was. I was flying in old state, and knew exactly where I was. I looked down from way up in the air and saw an apartment complex. I had seen it from the road before and knew it was where my BFF had just moved into an apartment. All of this was happening as if it was the most normal thing, and without any thought at all, I decided I'd swoop down into her apartment, and what I guess was my astral body did exactly that. Here's the weirdest part of this whole experience. I passed through the electric wires going from pole to pole, and I could actually feel them as they passed through me, like a bzzz of quick electricity in lines across my torso. Then I was hovering up by the ceiling of her apartment. Never had been inside that complex before, but I can still draw the floor plan just as I saw it from above. And then I saw BFF walking out of the bathroom with her hair in a towel. She sat down on the bed against the pillows and got a silver book from her nightstand and began writing in it. And then, zap, I was back home, back in my body. My eyes flew open and I sat straight up thinking, wow, did that really just happen? I picked up the phone and called BFF. I told her, this is what I need you to do. Write down what you've been doing for the last half hour and send it to me. She was confused and asked me why, and I told her, I'm going to send you a letter telling you what I've been doing for the last half hour, and then we'll talk. I wanted some actual proof in writing, just for myself, that this had really happened, but to be perfectly honest, I never doubted it. Got the letter, and sure enough, she'd been taking a shower and washing her hair. Then she wrote in her journal, a little silver book. She got my letter with the floor plan of her apartment and my description of what she'd been doing, and she wasn't all that surprised. She'd always known I was a little different. I was talking to my best friend one day about life, and things were really calm and chill. My disclaimer here is that I was decently tired, but I've never hallucinated nor sleepwalked before or anything like that. It's still plausible that that was the cause, but it felt so different. To continue, randomly in the middle of our conversation, she said that I entered some sort of trance, and everything I said sounded as if I were reading it from a script. During this time, I remember opening my eyes and saw an oak desk under me, and a paper with words and equations all over it. I remember writing with some sort of quill, but it was made from what looked like some kind of animal bone. So as this happens, I'm reading through this scribbling, and then it hits me. A huge wave of excitement and relief as I discovered something huge on this paper. I then woke up. I told my friend about this, and she suggested that it might be me in a past life, a memory of something that I was working on. Perhaps an inventor? I would throw all of that away and not worry about it if not for what happened next. I smiled at her, I don't remember any of this part, and started spewing out excited knowledge at her. She was smart enough to write it down. Pretty much all I ended up saying is, our universe is a shadow of another universe, meaning that our 3D world is a shadow or projection of a 4D world. I made it clear that it was possible that our universe might be a shadow of a shadow. The speed of light, quantum entanglement, gravity, and other universal laws are all footprints that prove this and will be shown to the world in the next few years. I made it clear that nature would not allow for a natural speed limit in the highest order universe. All human consciousness in every human is actually a single being in a higher order universe. This means that we're all connected in a very direct way. We do not have free will. I kept repeating this for some reason and stating that if we did not have free will, the random cosmos would not exist. I don't know what that means. It was such a strange experience because I woke up crying and smiling at her. I explained that I saw my past life and could feel things that he felt, the excitement and whatnot. We talked for a while and she explained everything that I told her and everything she wrote down. So little of it made sense to me, and I'm completely confused as to where any of that came from. I haven't slept in 2 days, but I'm extremely happy and excited about all of this. It feels so surreal. So, I've just found this subreddit after looking for information on Alice in Wonderland syndrome. I'm a 21-year-old guy, and I think I have had many relevant stories to share with you here. Here's one of my favorites. I'd been experiencing a huge amount of synchronicities in my life, aged 17 or so. My friend and I were obsessed, always talking about them. I was fond of the idea of Carl Jung's that the more you write down, be aware, and talk of synchronicity in your life, the more you will experience. And not necessarily in a you notice them because you're looking for them, but in a thought manifesting into reality way. Anyway, my parents and I have always loved deep, meaningful conversations about space and time, philosophy, UFOs. We call them hot tub conversations because one holiday in Florida we had many of these conversations in a hot tub, and my dad's birthday was coming up. We'd recently talked about coincidences a lot, and I happened to explain to him the differentiation between coincidence and synchronicity, a little bit about Carl Jung's thoughts, etc. He found it really interesting. Anyway, his birthday was a week or two later, and I'd kind of forgotten about this conversation. For his birthday, I thought it'd be cool to find a book online to buy him that was written by someone of the same name. Now, I wouldn't consider my dad's name to be hugely common, although not massively obscure either, so I wasn't getting my hopes up. I found a book written by an author of the same name. And the book was Incredible Coincidence: The Baffling World of Synchronicity by Alan Vaughan. He obviously thought this was amazing as well, which was great. No better way of explaining it than this. What's more, the book has been an invaluable source of information on synchronicity that I read often. I don't publicly speak about this event, but after studying various accounts on this page for a few weeks, I thought I would add my story to the mix. Thanks to you all for motivating me to contribute. In the summer of 2005, I was between my junior and senior year of college. Me and one of my closest comrades, who I'll refer to as Jay, took a day to do some sport climbing, beer drinking, and bouldering. Now, Jay and I were both fairly seasoned climbers, and we frequented the area of Jemez Springs, New Mexico, on almost any weekend we weren't tied up working. Likewise, we had a tradition of using a certain filling station because the gentleman who worked there didn't card us when we bought beer. We were both 20 at the time. Furthermore, we would frequent this filling station approximately 20 to 30 times a summer for beer and gas, but mostly beer. On this early July day, Jay and I were in the near vicinity of the filling station. However, we couldn't find the gas station. This was very unusual. We knew, within inches, the location of this filling station. After doing a few passes of the area, Jay drove his Tundra off the road to get to the area where the gas station was in the past. However, it simply was not there. And then it got weird. When we turned off the rope, we went down a 1 or 2 meter embankment, and neither of us recalled the road being elevated to the gas station. Then, in the spot where we knew the gas station to be, the land was undeveloped and pristine. Jay stopped the vehicle, and we both exited, looking around and scratching our heads. There were no power lines, no gas station, no car noises, no airplane noises, just an eerie and haunting quiet. And after about 2 to 3 minutes of loitering, Jay and I decided we would just call the filling station. In 2005, we didn't quite have the infrastructure for locating things on our cell phones and such as Google Maps and iMaps. However, you could Google a number and call if lost. And, you guessed it, no cell signal. Now, not an uncommon occurrence in the wild whereabouts of New Mexico, but we both frequently called and texted our friends, girlfriends, and family whilst out on our camping excursions, and were not at a point where we had previously lost signal. And to make things just downright funky, right before Jay and I decided to leave and find the road, a lone jackrabbit coyly approached us from the south. The rabbit sniffed and approached cautiously and came to about 15 feet of Jay's tundra. Now, I've spent much time in wide open spaces, and I've never, ever seen a rabbit exhibit that behavior. Yeah, this could have been a friendly rodent looking to meet some grisly college-age climbers, but it was just weird. After raising our eyebrows at one another in response to the rabbit incident, Jay and I climbed back into his tundra and hastily bolted in the direction of the road, east, and the weirdness thickened. There was no road, or we couldn't find it. We drove 100 or 150 miles east. No road. We backed up, drove north. No road. Our pace and attitudes were becoming frantic. This parallel dimensional charade lasted almost 5 minutes. We were swearing, sweating, and losing our minds. Then, out of a blur in our periphery, we found the highway. We were so ecstatic to find our refuge back to society that Jay almost smashed a Honda minivan while eagerly swerving onto the road. We spent the rest of the afternoon quietly mulling over our thoughts at the base of the pitch we were going to climb. Needless to say, we didn't climb it. The entire episode lasted close to 10 minutes, and to further substantiate our testimony, both Jay and I hold graduate-level degrees in the fields of physical science and healthcare. This event subsequently has led to my attendance of conferences related to physics, quantum mechanics, and I even attend a string theory workshop in Massachusetts. Though I'm not necessarily a believer in string theory, but that's for a different time. Here's my 2 cents on what happened. Our scientific father Einstein discussed parallel universes, and realities, or perceptions thereof, existing simultaneously, each dimension relativity, to the other in their version of space-time. I explain what happened to us as so. Space-time is like a tree, and each branch represents a separate and unique dimension. Much like a tree, some dimensions are entirely similar and some are not. And, like a tree, wind and environmental factors can affect the pitch, yaw, and attitude of the branches. Sometimes, branches of a tree touch or become entangled. For the sake of this form, we can call this a glitch. Jay and I were on a branch that glitched with another dimension, though similar but entirely different and unique. As to the factors that cause the branches of the tree to glitch, we would have to travel down the rabbit hole of relativity, dark matter, quantum physics, the 4th dimension, and other odds and ends that I cannot discuss in this media. However, this is the anecdote that I use to describe our experience, though I've only ever shared this theory with Jay, his wife, and my wife. Due to the credibility of our educations and the positions we hold, we don't discuss this incident with academics or friends alike. It just sounds nuts. It was time for bed. I was about 6 years old, and my mother was out grocery shopping, so that meant my stepdad would put me to bed. He had the doorknobs switched around so that my room would lock from the outside. I'd frequently get scared at night, and I guess that was his best idea for keeping me in my room. So I'm curled up in bed, locked in, and I start hearing the most random sounds, like people laughing and talking, Jack-in-the-Box music, and that boingy springing sound when it pops out, etc. So many sounds, it was like I was in the middle of a circus surrounded by people or something. I became so afraid that I rolled up into a ball and hid under my blanket. My back was facing the ceiling, and in this moment of complete fear, I felt this adult hand press on my back. Instantly, I thought it was my mother, so I popped up, took off the blanket to greet her, and quickly realized that no one was in the room. All I remember past that was crying myself to sleep. I'm 20 now, and I still can't sleep on my stomach or in any position that exposes my back. Here's some other weird things I have zero explanation for, in no particular order. Number 1. In the same house mentioned above, my sister swears on her life she saw shadow figures walking across the wall and a pair of pants walk around our room. We both would hear the weird circus and carnival sounds at night, but the above with the hand pressed on the back happened a bit before we shared a room. She had this big-ass toddler bed, a converted crib thing, and I'd frequently climb inside of it to protect her. We were always scared shitless. Number 2. I talked to my dead grandfather when I was 3. Mom and her boyfriend, my future stepfather, were talking while I was alone in the back seat talking to someone too. They turned around, asked who it was, and I said, "Papa Eddie." My stepfather and mother just started seeing each other, and he hadn't yet mentioned his father, Edward, had died of cancer. Number 3. I dreamt that my mother killed herself when I was in 6th grade, woke up before school and ran into her room to tell her. When I got home, we had a long talk, and she started sobbing and hugging me, saying God talked to me in the dream because she was planning on overdosing on meds while we were at school. She was going through a really bad divorce from my stepfather. Pretty sure you guys can already tell from the doorknob thing that he was extremely abusive. Number 4. One of my gerbils disappeared. Literally this past week. I have 2, in a big-ass aquarium shelf thing that's weighted down. There's no way he could have gotten out. I'm convinced the other one somehow ate him and all the evidence overnight. That's the only logical explanation. My boyfriend's really confused by this also. It's like he was never even in the tank. I really wish I had the receipt from the pet store or pictures or anything because my good Mr. PM disappeared. The light one's called Mr. AM and the dark one's called Mr. PM. Number 5. My Furby. Oh God, this thing was alive, I swear. My entire family doesn't even joke about this because my mother threw the batteries away and the thing was still talking at night. It would giggle and blink and I can still hear the terrifying robotic Furby blinking sounds. So, I think my mom experienced a glitch of some sort in April of 1999. My mom, my grandparents, and I were on our way home from Midway Airport outside of Chicago, Illinois at about midnight on April 13th, 1999. We were driving on I-55 somewhere between I-355 and I-294 heading west. This section of the interstate is 5 lanes, and in the middle lane, a car full of young adults has broken down. A couple people had gotten out of the car and were trying to push it off to the right shoulder of the road. As we were passing them in the second lane, the one immediately to the left of the middle lane, a semi was to our right and hit the car and the people pushing it. My mom said that she looked back and saw the car flipping up into the air, along with numerous other cars crashing, flipping over the median, and driving off the road trying to avoid the crash that had just occurred. According to my mother, all of the cars around us were crashing. Only us and the car in front of us had made it out of the pileup unscathed. She said there were probably at least a dozen cars involved, and that there were definitely multiple fatalities, just from the car of young adults that had been plowed into by the semi. The weird part about all of this is that there's no record anywhere of it happening. My mom, my grandma, and my grandpa all vividly remember it, up until their deaths even for my grandparents. My mom had talked to an Illinois state trooper that she knows to see if he knew anything about it, and he seemed to know what she was talking about and confirmed that there were multiple fatalities, but offered no other information about the accident. This is the only source she's ever been able to track down to consult about it aside from my grandparents, though. She's never been able to find any articles online about it, which is strange considering it would have been an incredibly devastating accident on a major interstate in Illinois. And I was just posting to see if anyone else has an explanation about what kind of glitch could have occurred, or if anyone else remembers this or has some sort of record of it. We've both looked all over online, and I thought maybe the Reddit community would be able to help us out here. I've been meaning to write about this for a long time on Glitch in the Matrix, as this is one of the strangest and most inexplicable moments in my life. It could, of course, be one major coincidence. As a background to this, I should share that I have a condition known as bipolar disorder type 1. This basically means that I have a tendency to move between depressive moods and high energy, low sleep, and sometimes psychotic, manic episodes in which my connection to reality begins to slip. Or maybe I'm just aware of the illusory nature of this existence. Hard to say. If you're in reading further, I did an AMA a while back. So, on to what happened. I can't exactly recall specifically what set me off, but after a couple of days of no sleep and seeing bizarre synchronicities everywhere, synchronicities being coincidences that seem to have a deeper meaning, I started to question if this life is real or some sort of massive simulation. I ended up rewatching the movie The 13th Floor. Spoiler alert. In the movie, the main character creates a simulation, only to suspect that his own world is a simulated reality. So he learns about a test that can prove whether or not the world is real. All you need to do is start driving without any plans. Go someplace you've never gone before. Roadblocks and impediments will appear. If you drive through these roadblocks, you'll eventually reach the edge of the simulation, where everything will be pixelated and show obvious signs that it's digital. So I said, why not try it? I got in my car, got on a major road that I'd only driven a couple miles east on, and just started driving. I had absolutely no destination in mind, and I had no idea where that road would take me. I figured that I would drive for a half hour or so and see what happened. But I barely made it 5 minutes before I noticed cop cars speeding past me. As I made it to the maybe 3 or 4 mile mark on the trip, I came to an intersection blocked by dozens of cop cars. I had to come to a complete stop. I was absolutely stunned. I sat there for several minutes in shocked silence. Immediately after I decide to test out the universe, it delivers right back to me one giant back up and go home response. As I sat there, a policewoman walked up and informed me that a shooting had just occurred a few minutes ago. Like, right before I had started driving. Almost as if the designer of the simulation said, "Oh fuck, we have another runner. Better throw up a roadblock, fast." I considered going around the incident and then continuing, but at that point my mind was too thoroughly fucked with to continue. I decided to go home. The thoughts have never ceased to trouble me. Was this all some colossal coincidence and I just ran into it? Or was I actually testing the boundaries of our artificial universe, and a roadblock was put there to stop me from causing problems? In response to the most common questions, why didn't I continue? Given the extreme nature of the roadblock, a shooting, I figured that I had enough. If I was wrong and it was a coincidence, no big deal. In the less likely scenario that I was in a simulation, I was concerned about what would happen next. An explosion? Car crash? Also, I knew that it was time to increase the meds and get some sleep, so there was that too. Why don't you try again? This happened 3 years ago, and since then I've driven extensively in my city. It's impossible for me to go somewhere now without knowing where the road ends. I would have to go a few hours just to start another experiment. Are you still crazy? I'm on my meds and very stable currently, but thanks for the concern. Aren't we all a little crazy in our own unique ways, though? This happened a couple of years ago in Inverness, Scotland, in the Eastgate Shopping Centre. I was studying in Scotland for my undergrad, and 3 other friends and I decided to take a quick trip north to Inverness and see Loch Ness, etc. for part of our spring break. It was around 4:45 p.m., and since Inverness is a relatively small town, shops close at 5 p.m. Therefore, we collectively decided to leave the mall and go into the town for some dinner. One of my friends, S, really wanted to go to Top Shop, which was in the mall. We told her we wouldn't have enough time to look properly and promised her we'd come back to the mall the next day, as we didn't have much to do anyways. In order to leave the mall, we needed to walk down a long hall. As we walked down this hall, we saw a Forever 21 at the end of it, which had an escalator inside of it that would lead out of the mall towards one of the main entrances that was next to an M&S. As I walked into Forever 21, things got a bit quiet. I could still hear things, but it almost seemed as if sound was a bit muffled. I didn't really pay too much attention to this at the time, but remarked it in retrospect. I remember talking to my friend A and commenting on a bunch of shirts that said Tokyo, saying something along the lines that I wish they had a shirt with the name of the city I'm originally from. She responded to this, and we browsed until a woman came up to us and told us we needed to leave since the store was closing soon. We accepted this and continued our chat as we rode down the escalator that led us out of the mall. I remember telling A that we should come back the next day, since we were already planning to come back to the mall. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and as planned, we returned to the mall the next day. We went to Top Shop, a couple of other stores, and then A and I decided we wanted to go to Forever 21. We both knew the exact way, past the Starbucks on the top floor and down the long hallway. To our surprise, we saw an HMV in its place instead. I wasn't too concerned, as I thought we must have just made a mistake and that it was somewhere else in the mall. I remember searching everywhere, checking the mall map, and even going to the outside of the mall to the M&S and seeing that the entrance we'd come out of the day before indeed led up to an HMV. At this point, A and I began to grow concerned, certain that the HMV was where the Forever 21 was supposed to be. I went into various stores and asked the attendants where the Forever 21 was. They all gave me a confused look and said that not only was there no Forever 21 in the mall, but there wasn't any in the whole of Inverness. At this point, A and I began to grow faint and sick. We were extremely disturbed, as we both were certain we had seen that before, and shared the same account of how to get to the store, our conversation within the store, and the attendant asking us to leave. Our 2 other friends, L and S, looked at us as if we were crazy, and said there'd never been a Forever 21 the day before. They figured that we were just looking for it aimlessly. This caused a big argument, as L and S were adamant that we had never left the mall through a Forever 21, but A and I were dead certain about it. We were made fun of and called crazy, but A and I truly remember the same event. Weirdly enough, I don't remember seeing or speaking to L and S in the store, almost as if they didn't exist. I've never honestly been so scared or disturbed in my life, but the fact that my friend shares my memory and experience gives me some solace. My other friends to this day are still certain we never went to Forever 21, yet when I ask them to tell me exactly how we left the mall, they cannot provide me with a conclusive answer. I still think about this a lot, and I've had many odd experiences in my life, but this is one of the oddest. Maybe I had gone into the future, where Forever 21 will be. The HMV could easily become antiquated. Or maybe I was in another dimension. Can anyone help or provide some theories on this? Anything is appreciated. Late 90s. So all the employees of a store that went out of business are having a little get-together as we say our goodbyes to people who are moving, remember fun at work, help each other with future plans, etc. People are telling different stories, happy, sad, angry, funny, and I get asked to tell some. I was on a roll and reminded people of several backroom antics and things that took place in and around the store. They requested I tell another, and I was fresh out of things I remembered, except for one, and it wasn't up to par with the other stories I told. So I embellish. Real. Me climbing on a shelf and over a mannequin, throwing down what I needed to the boss, and climbing back over while he made a joke about the mannequin being under me. My hilarious version
Me fumbling around and the boss red in the face laughing while I humped the mannequin before climbing down. Some time passes and our old boss, who was not at this get-together, gets a hold of someone and tells us all to come to his house. We go and drink, talk more, laugh, and things are going great. Everyone's having fun. All of a sudden, someone requests the boss's version of my story. I'm petrified. I know that he's just going to tell the regular version of the events. He's going to say, I was climbing over and climbing back. He proceeds to tell the exact same telling of events I made up earlier in the day, even giving more detail, but it matches exactly with what I said. No one was there to tell him ahead of time. Cell phones weren't prevalent amongst us, and even if someone had, what would have been the point? My grandparents have both passed quite a few years ago, but one of the stories that they told me has stuck with me all these years. Grandpa and Grandma were driving through Pennsylvania to an old family farm. The farm belonged to his uncle and cousins who lived there. Grandpa was a city kid and had visited the farm every summer for years when he was growing up. It was around 25 years since he'd been there, but he loved that farm and wanted to introduce Grandma to his cousins and show her around. As they drove closer to the farm, Grandpa began to tell Grandma about the little town that was on the road on the way to the farm. Soon, they reached the little town, and Grandpa was amazed that it hadn't changed a bit. Towards the end of the town, they saw that a hotel was on fire. The road was blocked by firemen using an old-fashioned fire wagon with a water tank pulled by horses. And they thought it was strange, but they chalked this up to being in rural Pennsylvania. Eventually, the water wagon moved and they could drive on. They reached the farm, and after greeting Grandpa's uncle and cousins, they shared the news of the fire at the hotel. Grandpa suggested that they all go down and see if they could help. The relatives looked shaken. That's when one of the cousins explained that there was no town. Not anymore. About 20 years before, the hotel burned down, and the fire spread to most of the small town's main street. After their businesses were lost, people left the town. In fact, the uncle and cousins were the last people living in the area. Grandpa and Grandma couldn't believe it. They had just seen the town, the fire, even smelled the smoke. Grandpa, Grandma, and some cousins got in the car and drove back to town, going back the same way they came in. And the town was gone. Just some burnt-out shells of a few buildings remained. So, I recently discovered this subreddit and can't wait to read more of all your experiences, but I want to share mine first. This happened about 2 years ago, when I was going through the necessary classes to be able to take my driving test to get my license. The classroom portion of the class was several sessions of 3 hours, and was done through my local YMCA. It's about halfway through the course and halfway through tonight's class, so I'll say it was around 7:30 p.m. Now, the classroom is fairly large, and the tables and chairs were set up in a U shape that made it so everyone's back was to a wall. One of the walls was lined with windows, and that just so happened to be the wall my back was turned to. It was the middle of the lecture, and we were learning about the proper technique of merging onto a highway. The teacher was drawing the roads on the board when all of a sudden I heard a window shattering, followed by the loudest ringing/buzzing sound in my ears. At the same time, it was as if someone had slammed my head into the table with an incredible amount of force. The most startling thing was that when my head hit the table, I didn't feel it. As a matter of fact, I didn't feel anything. My head felt lighter, but for some reason I couldn't move a muscle. It felt as if my entire body was locked in place while everyone in the room started screaming. I could hear the sounds of chairs being knocked over as some people ran, and I even heard a few people vomiting onto the tile floor. This whole time I was just staring at the white table that was now covered in my brain matter and blood. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. And then, in an instant, I was back. Everything was normal again except for a slight ringing sensation in my ear. I immediately turned around to see the window still intact behind me, and the teacher had just began to draw the picture of the highway on the board again. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night, and I sure as hell wasn't going to drive home when my dad came to pick me up. I live on the far west/north side of town, but I work in the heart of the city. I used to drive and park, but when I realized I could take a single bus a block from my house and it would drop me off across the street to the building I work in, and I started riding the big green limousine. 3 days of parking was the same cost as a 2-week bus pass, not to mention the gas saved and the lack of stress dealing with downtown driving. Anyhow, I've been doing this for 9 months, and I've got it down to a routine. I leave my house at the same time every day. I see the same people at my bus stop. A young woman about 20 gets off at the engineering college. A mom and her young son always get off to transfer to another bus that this one runs right by the end of the line for, and a guy who works at the local cable company, who I talk to on a regular basis, gets off at the transfer point for another bus that heads deep east in town. 4 days a week I have the same bus driver, Frances. She's a very friendly lady, and on nights I don't sleep well and doze off, she's been known to get up from the driver's seat and gently shake my shoulder to wake me. My stop is the last stop on the line. After my stop, she hits the downtown terminal and turns around. Most days, there's 2 other people that get off on my stop. An older lady that works in my building is a teller in the bank on the first floor, and a younger guy with long pencil-thin dreadlocks that he has tied in a ponytail. He always pulls the cord for the bell as soon as we pass the stop before ours. The manner of his dress says he works in a business casual environment, but not in my building. On Thursdays and Fridays, there's another younger woman who also gets off at our stop. Very pretty, dresses sharp, and works in my building. When I stop at the coffee shop in the lobby, she turns and enters the first bank of elevators. She either works for the bank itself or for the investment firm that is housed on the upper teens floors. Like I said, routine. Today, it was different. The front of the bus has 2 rows of 3 that are turned so the backs face the windows. These are for the elderly or disabled travelers. They can fold up so wheelchairs can go there. I always sit in the first seat on the driver's side that faces forward. The young guy sits 1 seat back from me, but on the other side of the aisle. The bank teller lady sits in the way back. Today, after most of the passengers clear out, there was a girl sitting in the disabled and elderly seats. Not a big deal. I mean, people sit there. They just have to give them up for an elderly or disabled. She had multicolored hair, mostly green and blue, held back with a scrunchie, wearing a red, black, gray flannel shirt, not tucked in, but buttoned up over a black t-shirt, a pair of jeans, and a pair of high-top sneakers. I remember what she was wearing for a couple reasons. One, I've gotten older, but in my youth I was big into the alternative scene, and she was dressed like a lot of the girls I hung out with back in the day. These were the girls I found attractive. 2, physically she was cute, fit, well-proportioned. Here's where the glitch starts. I think of her, and I know she was cute, but I can't picture her face at all. No features, no makeup, no piercings, nothing. All the things I would look for or at and get the idea of cute, and it's coming back totally blank. But I can picture every article of clothing she wore, including the black and silver bands she had on her right wrist and silver rings on her left hand. I can tell you her shoes were Chuck T's, not black but a red flannel pattern, similar but not the same as her shirt. But I can't picture her face at all. Her fingernail polish was black but chipped in a few places and needed a retouch, but again, I can't picture her face. Maybe for other people that's normal, but not for me. I can picture clear details about her. Stuff that I never notice. Stuff my girlfriend gives me crap about for not noticing on her. But I can picture this girl sitting in front of me crystal clear. And it's 4 hours later, and I still have this image of this girl in my head. Clear as a bell. There's a couple stops left, and she turns from sitting back to leaning forward and looking towards the front of the bus, looking out the big open window, down the main avenue out at the lakefront. I remember, to my embarrassment, noticing that her rear fit those jeans very well in a perfect apple bottom. I remember her turning her head to look at me over her shoulder. I have the distinct impression of her smiling before turning her attention back forward again. We pass the second to last stop. I look over at the young guy as he pulls the cord. He yawns, wide, uncovered. I smirk and yawn as well, invoked by his yawn. I rub my eyes, and when the fog leaves them, she's not there. Confused, I look around the bus, like somehow in the half a second she moved out of my view, like behind me. The young guy is doing the same thing. We look at each other, then at where she was sitting, and back to each other, and we both have this what the fuck look on our face, like we both know what happened, but neither of us can figure it out. The bus comes to our stop. Still confused, I get up and walk to the front of the bus to get off. "See you tomorrow, Francis." "Yeah, she should be back tomorrow." I turn around after I get off the bus, and instead of the chubby, giggly, warm black lady that took my fare when I got on, it's some skinny old white guy with a long face and big bushy mustache. He smiles, closes the door, and drives off. The young guy who got off with me pauses and opens his mouth like he's going to say something to me, then just walks off, shaking his head and rubbing his neck. The cashier lady, who exited from the back door of the bus, stands next to me, waiting to cross the street, chuckles and looks up to me. It's going to be an odd day today. I can just feel it, you know. I still don't even know how to feel about what happened. Part of me is a little freaked out. I've never had something like this happen to me. The weirder part is the niggling little voice in the back of my head just saying, "Forget it. It's not important." I wanted to write this down in case I did forget it. I wanted proof for myself, you know? I've had this account for a while, but I've never really used it, so I'm pretty new here and I'm not entirely sure about all the formatting. But basically, to preface, I go to a Catholic school, so my parents have to pay tuition for me to go to school there, and we're not rich by any means. Working class. And so I'm on a lot of financial aid, about half my tuition cost. And because my financial aid was, or rather still is, as I'm only a junior, so much, after school ended, all of us on financial aid would be assigned a room, and mine was up on the third floor, science floor now, that used to house nuns who lived at the school. But that's irrelevant to this. And I would clean the room, just spray the desks down with the cleaner, straighten them, sweep, clean the whiteboards, do whatever. And the teacher whose room would sometimes ask me to do a few extra things here and there, because she was a physics teacher in her second year of teaching at my school, so there would be some toys and such laying around the room that her students would forget to put away themselves. It really only took maybe 10 minutes extra at the most, and my carpool just waited for me to be done, and by that time the bulk of the traffic had calmed down, so the streets were a lot freer of cars and it was a quicker drive. The year itself passes by without anything unusual happening in regards to this, and towards the end of the year, the teacher started talking about moving. I asked where she was moving to, and she responded with a Central American country, Panama, I believe, which surprised me, as I live in the Midwest of America, so that would be a long ways away. From our idle chat, either she or her husband had found a really nice job there, and so they were moving there for a few years, and she wouldn't be teaching at my school anymore, for which I was kind of glad because even though I liked her, I wanted to take physics my senior year, and I was worried at that point I would inevitably start failing her class, as then I hadn't been diagnosed, let alone treated for ADHD and depression, and those things really did start affecting my grades as I got older, so I wouldn't have to worry about having her and disappointing her with my grades then. But I really did like her, and I thought she was a nice person, and I was sad to see her leave. Doing that in of itself wasn't anything weird. It was just normal for me after a while. And part of a routine. Spray and straighten the desks, sweep and put the books away, make small talk with her if she was in the room, she usually was, and leave and check off on the list that I cleaned her room. They didn't make me do it after that year, so I could just go straight away after school. They got a new physics teacher, a guy this time, and he was in a different room than hers because some of the teachers switched classrooms for one reason or another, and that didn't strike me as abnormal, just whatever. And sophomore year was normal. I'm a junior now. We're about 2 weeks from the end of the first quarter, and we were doing ACT practice in the new physics teacher's room. It wasn't the first time we'd done this. A certain group of juniors would go up to this room that was based on our homerooms and take parts of the practice test and such, and he knew my name already when he called out attendance for the test, but I never thought much of it. He knew plenty of other students who'd never had him before. But the freaky part is, this comment he made to me, he referenced me cleaning his room 2 years ago about how sometimes he would have things up on the whiteboard and ask me to leave them there, or just clean it all, or not even bother. I did those things, but with him, I never cleaned his room. Ever. I only ever cleaned the old teacher's room. I gave him a confused look and told him I never cleaned his room. And he told me that he's been there for years, that this is his 4th year at my school. I just brushed it off and left the room to go to my next class, figuring maybe he was confusing me with someone else or something. I very much remember that I cleaned her room. I remember her talking about her son, and I remember her voice. I remember her talking about how we were both vegetarians. I remember her. When I went home, I looked into my freshman yearbook to look for her just to see that he wasn't in there. But he was. I flipped through every single page and I couldn't find one picture of her. No other staff members remember her. I work overnights at a small store. Aside from the key and code locked door in the back for deliveries, there's only one door in or out of the store. When anyone steps into the store, a buzz sounds, kind of like a doorbell, which alerts staff that there is a customer entering or that one left. Something I find useful, especially when working alone, as I'm not always right at the registers to see the doors. Sometimes the bell goes off and no customers have entered, which can be caused by newspaper deliverers dropping off the papers or a particularly large bug or anything else really, so nothing too strange if I hear the bell and the store is empty. However, there have been a few occasions where I've been close to the front of the store when the bell goes off and seen someone enter, only to look around for them a bit later when they haven't finished shopping, to find the store empty. Obviously, if they'd left, I'd have heard the bell. The most recent time this occurred, I had exited an aisle at the sound of the bell and saw a man enter. He looked a bit older, heavily lined face, though based on the worn and dirty state of his jeans and black hoodie, he may have been younger than he appeared, but artificially aged by whatever hardships he clearly faced. I greeted him and asked if he needed assistance. In a gruff yet somehow faded voice, and without looking at me, he declined and continued along into another aisle. Some 15 minutes later, I scanned the store and didn't see him anywhere, so I checked the camera footage. It was so eerie, I have chills thinking about it. The footage clearly shows me in the aisle I'd been working in, and at about the time I'd estimate the man arrived, I pause in my work. I just stand there, still, for a handful of seconds, and then resume my work. I only left the aisle later to scan the area for the customer. I don't know what to make of this. I distinctly recall seeing him and greeting him. I can remember minute details about him, but clearly on film, he was never there, and I never moved to greet anyone. I don't always work alone. Until last night, I'd only experienced these vanishing customers when I was by myself, but last night I had a coworker with me. Around 2 a.m., the buzzer on the store's entrance went off, signaling the arrival of a customer. My coworker looked up at the sound, but I was closer to the front of the store, so she resumed working while I went to greet the customer. A tallish woman in a suit that looked fairly expensive had entered, and I asked her if she needed any assistance with anything. She seemed to either ignore me or not hear me, not looking my way as she continued further into the store. That kind of reaction isn't common, but not rare enough to cause concern, so I resumed my work. A few minutes later, I heard the bell at the front counter ring. I was near the center of the store with my coworker near the back, so I told her I'd get it and headed for the register. There was nobody there, and I quickly scanned the aisles to see if the customer had simply stepped away from the register after ringing for assistance. The store had no customers. I asked my coworker if she'd seen where the woman went, and she told me she hadn't seen her at all, though she'd heard the buzzer when she entered. I said it was strange that she'd ring the bell and then seemingly hide or something, and my coworker gave me a weird look as she told me the bell hadn't rung and she'd been confused when I told her I'll get it before. I proceeded to get really freaked out. We headed behind the register as I started to tell her about my previous experiences with vanishing customers, which her expression made clear she did not believe, though she held back from stating her disbelief. Just as I began describing the events of my previous post, the buzzer on the door went off, and in walked the exact same woman I'd seen enter the store before. I'm sure I looked foolish just staring at her in shock, but she didn't look at me. She didn't look at my coworker when she asked her if she needed any assistance either. She seemed to just ignore her or not hear her, as she'd done with me. As soon as the customer rounded into an aisle and out of earshot, I quickly told my coworker the situation, that this woman had entered the store minutes before and had not exited before re-entering. By this point, my coworker looked pretty concerned, like she thought I'd lost my mind. Half a minute later, the customer returned to the front and approached the register, which I was standing behind. She placed a can of Starbucks coffee and her store rewards card on the counter, then glanced over to the bell, hesitated a moment, and rang it. I was pretty shaken by the whole thing, but kept my composure, greeting her in my usual upbeat way and asking if she'd like a bag. Again, she didn't reply or look at me or seem to register that I'd spoken at all. I rang in her card and coffee, and she put her credit card into the chip reader. When the payment approved, she took her things and left. My coworker remarked that her behavior was odd, but I was already heading away from the register and toward the office. My coworker followed me in. I pulled up footage from some of the cameras telling her that we needed to check what happened to the customer after the first time she entered. The footage showed the door slide open, but nobody was there. As stated in my previous post, sometimes large bugs or seemingly nothing activates the door and buzzer, so my coworker didn't find that odd. What she did find odd was that on the footage, instead of exiting the aisle to check the door as she'd seen me do, I stood stationary for a few seconds and then continued working. I paused the footage, freaking out internally, and my coworker blurted, "What the fuck is happening right now?" We resumed the footage. A bit later, it showed me as I told my coworker, "I'll get it," and proceeded to the front and then around the store as I searched for the customer who, according to the cameras, was never there. We reviewed the footage from her second visit, and everything appeared normal, aside from her weirdly ignoring both of us. It was entirely uneventful. Then we talked about the earlier footage, and neither of us could come up with a reason the cameras weren't showing what we both remembered occurring. Honestly, I hope you guys can come up with some kind of logical explanation for this. My coworker seems really concerned about this whole thing, and understandably so, as much as I'd like assurance that this can be explained away from my own peace of mind, I'm really more concerned for her. I have this feeling like she wasn't supposed to be a part of this. This is the only time anyone else has witnessed this happening, and it previously kind of felt like my thing. So, help us out, guys. I experienced this a few days ago and have been deeply unsettled and anxious since then. I stumbled across this subreddit purely by chance yesterday, saw some screenshots on Tumblr, so maybe I was meant to share this story? A few nights ago, I was laying in bed, trying to fall asleep. I had just reached that moment between sleep and awake, when you're still conscious and can still feel your body in bed, but you know you're slipping into sleep. I had a sudden feeling that if I fell asleep at that moment, I would have a nightmare, so I forced my eyes open to wake myself up. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a totally different situation. I was still laying in a bed, but in a room that wasn't my dorm. I was wearing a blue pajama shirt, and I could see my hands were thin and spotted and wrinkled. The bed had a white duvet, and I was surrounded by people who, by their appearance, looked like they could be my family, even though I've never seen them before. They looked concerned, and they were all staring at me. I distinctly remember the face of a young girl with pigtails. She looked to be around 10 or 11, had a round face and big dark eyes, and was leaning forward over the baseboard to look at me better. Then, against my own will, I fell back against the pillow, my eyes shut, and I experienced a feeling similar to sleep, where everything goes dark and all sensation fades away, but it felt deeper and emptier than normal sleep. And then I opened my eyes, and I was back in my dorm and in my normal twin bed. The vision only lasted maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but it put me in a full panic fight-or-flight mode. I was gasping for air and shaking. It felt as if I'd just come back from death. And then the feeling settled into me that the moment I experienced was my actual death, far, far in the future. There's a chance this could have just been a dream, since I was falling asleep right before, but when I felt that I was falling asleep, I was definitely still conscious and had the willpower to try and wake myself up, the result of many attempts at lucid dreaming. I also thought this might be a variation on the typical you feel like you're falling and you suddenly wake up, but I've never experienced a vision in that situation, nor did I feel like I was physically falling any time during my glitch. To be honest, I'm still super unsettled, and I don't know what really happened. It's been a few days, but I can't shake this feeling of dread that one day I'm going to die, even though I obviously knew that before my experience. Thoughts, anyone? Today on our walk to my daughter's bus stop, my oldest daughter, Em, says, "Are we living in a storybook?" I reply with, "No, why would you say something like that?" Her response gave me goosebumps. Because sometimes I feel like someone is reading my story and telling me what to do. I feel like my nightmares are a scary story that someone's telling. My youngest daughter, S, chimes in. "Yes, Em, we're a story." Em, "Do you feel it too, S?" S, "Yes, and sometimes I know what's gonna happen." Me, "What do you mean?" S, "Yesterday, I knew we would make bracelets at school." Her first day at school was yesterday. M, "Sometimes I dream what's gonna happen in my day and I try to change it, but it doesn't work. Just like you can't change a storybook. It's always the same." This conversation went on for a good 5 minutes, mainly talking about who they think writes the story and dreams they've had about their stories. It ended with, M, "I know I'm right because one time someone told me I can't change who I am. I'll always be who I'm going to be." Does anyone else have weird stories like this that their kids tell? I know it's not related, but both girls complain of shadow people in their room. 2 glitches involving my sister. The first one happened maybe 5 years ago. I was sleeping in my bed when my body was inclined to wake up. I opened my eyes and my sister was staring at me, only a few inches away from my face. It was startling, but I wasn't scared. I said, "Hello?" But she didn't respond. She just left my room with my door open. Now, I have to quickly explain the layout of the floor I was on for this to make sense. My bedroom is on the top floor, and from the perspective of my room, to the left are stairs leading down to the main floor, and to the right is the door to the bathroom, which I have a pretty clear view of. So, my sister left my room and went down the stairs. I'm not much of a morning person, so I lied in the bed a bit longer, but kept my eyes open. I just stared outside my door, willing myself to get up. Then, the bathroom door swung open, and my sister walked out. I was completely shocked. She didn't walk back up the stairs to use the bathroom. I would have seen her. Those stairs are the only way to access the floor I was on. I asked her if she'd been in my room a few minutes earlier, and she denied it. I'd be tempted to blame this on the effects of sleep, but I was, and still am, terrified to sleep with my door open, so I always closed it before going to bed. If I truly did dream of my sister entering my room, I have no idea how my door opened. The second incident was just 2 years ago. I was applying mascara in my room in front of my mirror when I dropped it. I looked around for a bit, but I couldn't find it. I thought it was odd because my room was fairly small and there weren't many places for it to hide, but I wasn't surprised with myself. I can be very clumsy and airheaded. I went to go wash off my one eye of mascara. If I couldn't find the tube, I didn't want to head off to school with just one eye done. In the bathroom, when my sister exited her room. Our rooms are just a foot apart, so our encounter was pretty immediate relative to the time of me dropping the mascara. She asked if I've been in her room, and I denied it. Then she held out my mascara tube I just dropped. I took it and asked how she found it, and she told me she just found it on her floor and went to return it to me. I was amazed and told her how I just dropped it in my room, and she too laughed with disbelief, with my one eye of mascara as proof. We now joke that our rooms share a wormhole, although that's the only experiences we have with it. First post, so here it goes. October 18th, 2008 was a Sunday. I was in 11th grade, and up to the normal activities that teenagers my age would be up to. I had gone to a party the night before and came home around 2 a.m. I was tossing and turning all night. Finally, around 4:30 a.m. I said screw it and went downstairs to watch TV. To my surprise, I see my dad on the couch reading the newspaper. My dad served 30 years in the military and he woke up early for work every day, but this was a Saturday, so it was a little abnormal. And I thought nothing of it at the time. My dad says, "Hey, bub, what are you doing up so early?" I tell him I couldn't sleep, and he says something along the lines of, "Yeah, me neither." He suggests that we go out to breakfast, and I agree. We waited a few hours and decided to go to Bob Evans. The last time we had been to a breakfast together was when my sister Christy had visited from Oklahoma about a year earlier, at Bob Evans. Once we get there, our waitress introduced herself, and her name was also Christy. Wow, what are the chances? My dad and I had a good chuckle and informed the waitress Christy that the last time we'd been out to breakfast was the year before in the same location with Christy. Me and my dad had a nice little breakfast, and upon arriving home, there were like 10 butterflies in my mom's garden, which is cool to begin with, but even cooler considering Christy loved butterflies and had a butterfly tattooed on her ankle. And after being home for an hour or two, I was in my computer room downloading an Eminem CD. I heard the phone ring, and I was normally really proactive about answering it, but on this occasion, I let it ring. My dad picked it up, and the next thing I hear him say is, "John!" And I immediately said, "What happened to Christy?" It turns out, she'd passed away around 4 that morning, and I just knew it once my dad said my name. Not sure if this is a glitch, a coincidence, or what, but there's my story of the unexplainable. So, I just woke up from one of those dead sleeps, and I was having one of those movie-length, vivid-as-fuck dreams, you know? The ones that feel insanely real. So it starts off that I'm suddenly living back in about 2008 in an old house with an old girlfriend in the old suburb we used to live in. Obviously, this weirds me out because I say to my ex in my dream something like, "Hold on, why am I here? You and I broke up and I moved away. I live in... now. I'm seeing someone else and we live together." And then she says something like, "Not this again. We've been through this, sweetie. You're sick. You made this up all in your head. It isn't real, remember?" Now, obviously, I fight the suggestion because I know where I live and what year I live in. So my ex-girlfriend then invites my mom over to the house, still in my dream, and a psychologist, and they both convince and remind me that I'm crazy, and I've been receiving treatment for a while now for repeatedly thinking that I live in a future that I made up in my head with a new girlfriend, a new house, and an entire alternate reality. So, this starts to really fuck me up because now my mom is involved and she's sitting right in front of me, telling me I'm insane, have been for a while, and that I made up a pretend future that I live in my head. Now I know that no one reading this knows my mother, but my mom would never joke about something like this with me, so if she's saying it, then I believe her. So after what must be days or weeks, you know how time distorts in dreams, I guess I start to accept my reality. The future isn't real. I made it up. My new house and girlfriend aren't real. I made them up too. And above all, I'm crazy. I believe that. And then something really messed up happens. I start to get a headache in my dream, and I tell my girlfriend in my dream that I'm going to lie down, and she says, "You shouldn't go to sleep if you've got a headache. You know that makes your delusions worse." But my headache is bad, so I go to bed anyway. And then I wake up. For real, I wake up. Now, I literally woke up 20 minutes ago and spent the first 2 or 3 minutes sitting on the edge of my bed convinced that nothing was real. I've woken up in my fantasy life, right? Like they convinced me it was. In a future that doesn't exist, in a house that doesn't exist, with the girlfriend I made up. I can't entertain this fantasy. It's not real. I poked my sleeping girlfriend in the belly a few times. I walked around my new house, all of which I was amazed at how real it looked. Seriously, that's what I've been doing for the past 10 minutes, being amazed at how real this looks. If anyone was outside my window watching me, I must have looked like a mental patient floating around my house, touching walls and looking at shit. It's only now, about 20 minutes since I woke up, that I'm sitting in my kitchen and it's all making sense as to what has happened. Although just a little bit of me, a tiny bit, is still not sure which reality I belong to, because I do have a bit of a headache and I'm not supposed to go to sleep with headaches or I'll end up back in my fantasy world. I mean, what kind of crazy shit is that for a dream? How does a brain even come up with that? I've frequented this sub a lot recently, and I've never actually posted anything here before, but here goes. My first post, as I was just reminded of it recently. Back in early 2012, I was a sophomore in high school on the lacrosse team. I remember being at practice when one of the seniors was humming a song to himself that sounded familiar, and then goes, "Now you're just somebody that I used to know." I look at him and say, "Wow, I haven't heard that song in years." And I remember he looked at me confused, but naturally didn't say anything, because the song had actually only come out that year. I could remember a rock song that I would sing as a little kid, with those same words and melody to them. I just thought it was weird that this song was suddenly becoming popular again, until I heard it and assumed someone was covering it. Anyway, the song blew up, and a conversation came up with my friends, and I mentioned how I didn't like this version, that it was a cover of a much better song. Of course, everyone looked at me like I was crazy, especially when I was insistent that I had heard the song and used to sing it to myself years before after they told me that it was a new song and just released this year. I brought it up to my parents, and they both remember me singing and humming those lyrics to myself. Of course, there must have been suggestive questioning here, so they might only be remembering it that way because I brought it up to them, and I was so insistent about it. I was always singing to myself, and I swear one of the lines was, "Now you're just somebody that I used to know," in the same melody that's in the song. It's just bizarre. Maybe Gautier just happened to write a song that was very similar to the one I had made up as a child. Either way, it's always been very uncomfortable to me and makes me feel crazy, and I've never liked the song because of it. It feels like the uncanny valley. It's close to the original version in my mind, but different enough that it bothers me to the point I won't listen to the song. Has anyone else ever heard a new song for the first time and been convinced that they heard it before a long time ago? This happened to me when I was 18 or 19 years old. I'm 33 now. I was hanging out at my buddy's house, smoking weed and drinking. 2 of my close friends were also there. These 2 guys decided to take a bunch of acid and offered me some. I declined, as I had to wake up early for work. They took their acid and proceeded to space out and listen to Skinny Puppy for the rest of the night. That shit isn't my cup of tea, so I decided to head out. I went home and fell asleep pretty soon after. During the night, I started having this very realistic and very disturbing nightmare. I was being chased by demons, and I was terrified. The demons were chasing me, and I was screaming for my friends to save me. What set this dream apart was that the demons caught me, and they started tearing me apart, and all of my senses were firing. And I could hear the tearing, I could smell the blood, and I could feel everything. The dream only ended when my head was ripped off. I woke up terrified and immediately looked at my clock. It was 3:27 a.m. Remember that. The next day I went back over to my buddy's house, and both of them were still there. I mentioned the dream and explained it exactly as I've done here. Both of my friends looked horrified, and I swear one was about to cry. This is what happened after I left. They continued to space out and listen to Skinny Puppy after I left. At some point, one friend asked the other what time it was. He told him it was 3:28 a.m. Then both of them spaced out for what they felt must have been 30 to 45 minutes. During this time, both of them claimed to have had visions of me being chased by demons and eventually getting ripped apart as I screamed for them to help. They both came back to reality after my head was torn off. Then, one friend asked the other friend what time it was. It was 3:26 a.m. To this day, I get chills when I think about it, and the friends I still talk to won't talk about it. In mid-July, I learned that the sister of my closest childhood friend had passed away tragically. I'm going to refer to the sister as O and my childhood friend as N. In elementary school, we often hung out together, and although O was an older teen and often annoyed by us, some of my best memories were spent with her, especially the three of us. Due to college and personal stressors, N and I had drifted apart over the past 3 years after nearly a decade of intense friendship. On July 5th, I felt a deep sense of sadness I couldn't shake off. I thought I was hungover from the previous night, and that was affecting my mood. I spent all night listening to my music library on shuffle, which is around 12,000 songs, and I could barely focus on anything that played. Suddenly, The Drowning Man by The Cure comes on. I've maybe heard this song once, if ever. I just happened to have the album Faith because a close pal of mine absolutely adores the band. I felt incredibly drawn to this song, and it was all I could listen to for the next week and a half. I even put it on my phone and listened to it during my lunch breaks at work. Here are the lyrics, because it's relevant to the rest of my story. She stands 12 feet above the flood. She stares alone across the water. The loneliness grows and slowly fills her frozen body, sliding downwards. One by one, her senses die. The memories fade and leave her eyes, still seeing worlds that never were, and one by one the bright birds leave her. Starting at the violent sound, she tries to turn. The final noiseless slips and strikes her soft dark head. The water bows, receives her, and drowns her at its ease, I would have left the world all bleeding. Could I only help you, love? The fleeting shapes so many years ago, so young and beautiful and brave. Everything was true. It couldn't be a story. I wish it was all true. I wish it couldn't be a story. The words all left me lifeless, hoping, breathing like the drowning man. Oh, Fushia, you leave me, breathing like the drowning man, breathing like the drowning man. On July 15th, I receive a text from another old friend of mine, who grew up with O and N as well, telling me that she's found out that O has passed away. I was absolutely shattered and extremely anxious, because I didn't know how, where, and exactly when she had died. My now nearly non-existent friendship with N made it difficult to even conceive an appropriate way to ask these questions. I couldn't just text or call her and ask these things. She was grieving, and we didn't have that connection anymore. The memorial service was held about a week or two after I was informed of her passing. The pamphlets given out at the service showed O's portrait and her birthday and the date of her death. She had apparently passed away on July 5th, days before I ever knew, and the same night I became obsessed with the drowning man. I also learned from one of O's oversharing but well-meaning relatives the details of her death. Honestly, I wish I never had. I wasn't emotionally prepared in the slightest. However, it's important to tell you all that this relative said O had passed out and drowned in her bathtub after celebrating the 4th of July. Obviously now, you can see the connection. I listened to the song again when I got home because I was still obsessed, and then it all hit me. This isn't the first time I've had this happen to me. However, the other stories happened when I was younger. I'm 22 now, and I wanted to respect this subreddit's policies about posting childhood stories since I'm new to glitching the Matrix. If you'd like to also hear these stories, please let me know. I've worked in a hospital for a few years now. It's just for a service department, so it's nothing fancy. About a year into my employment here, I saw an older man seemingly appear out of nowhere on several occasions. It was a Saturday afternoon, so the halls were mostly deserted. I was walking down a long, empty corridor looking straight ahead. I wasn't looking around or tired or even thinking of anything else. My full attention was on the hall in front of me. And around the halfway point, a man just appeared in the hall in front of me. There were no doors nearby, and the other end of the hall was 30 feet behind him, so he couldn't have just walked up without me noticing. The hall was empty, and then, pop, a guy standing there. He looked just as confused as I was, as if he had no idea where he was. He was a relatively tall, 60-year-old man, clean-shaven, with a comb-over. He had khaki pants, a pastel red and yellow pinstriped dress shirt, and a clipboard. We made eye contact for a second. He looked past me, behind himself, and at his clipboard before walking past me like nothing happened. The following week, I saw him again. It was a weekday, so things were busier. There's an elevator set back into a little alcove near where I work. I was walking toward it when I heard the ding of the elevator arriving, and then the doors opening. Just before I turned into the alcove, clipboard guy walks out and walks right past me. I turned to catch the elevator before it left, but it wasn't there. The elevator was 3 floors below me. I know this because I could hear the voices of the guys from engineering and hear them offloading something heavy into their workshop. The next day, I got into a stainless steel freight elevator and hit the button for my floor. Just before the door shut, I heard hurried footsteps and the door opened back up. All right, someone wanted to catch a ride. No one was waiting to come in, though. Nothing much at all happened besides the noticeable echoing footsteps walking in and the thump of someone leaning up against the metal wall. The last time I experienced anything like this was a few days later. My hospital has nearly every door hooked up to a button on the wall. I was walking at a good pace and trying to stay out of the way, so I was as close to the wall as I could be. A door was coming up, and I remembered about a half-second too late that I was supposed to hit the switch. While still going forward, I twisted and leaned back a bit to reach the button as I went past. Who else would be behind me than clipboard guy? The thing was, he was walking the other way. He was immediately, and I mean 1 or 2 feet behind me, walking at a brisk pace in the opposite direction. In order for him to be there and walking at that speed, he would have had to walk through the same place I did at the same time. I didn't see him ahead of me beforehand, but he was tight to the wall just like I was. The only people I've ever told about this are my wife, my parents, and one close friend. I won't let any of my coworkers know for fear of being branded as the crazy one. If it was just one of these events, I could brush it off as just misremembering what happened. The culmination, though, of 4 unique events, especially the first one, has convinced me that this really is what I saw. This involves objects popping into existence, noises that aren't there, and spatial situations that, well, just can't happen. Again, I could write that off, but it all centers around the same mysterious gentleman that I haven't seen before or since. It still makes me feel uneasy 2 years later. I know a fair amount of these stories are feasible to explain and are basic coincidences at most, but hear me out. This may be long, but I was thoroughly disturbed last night at work, and it seems like a glitch for me to even have found this subreddit the day after my experience. Let me just say that I'm known to be a pretty observant guy. All my friends and family who know me even slightly well are aware that I notice everything. It's pretty hard to slip something past me. Not to say I'm proud or a cocky asshole or anything, but it's just a little background about me before you listen to this long-ass story. Thanks. I've worked at this sandwich joint for over 1.5 years. We run a tight-knit crew. I'm a good employee, in good standing with the owner and manager, and I'm a little bit of a night crew manager myself. The restaurant itself is very slow, as we tend to receive maybe 20 to 30 customers within my 6 to 7 hour closing shift. This means that I naturally tend to start conversations with customers. I like to figure out where people work their day jobs, where they went to college, how their lives are, and all that stuff. You could say I get personal, but hey, people like it when you're not just some robotic employee. I even met a dude who went to Berkeley Law School, and he told me a lot about life and school and stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I like to talk to people. It gets me through the days, and generally people are pretty damn nice about it. I even have a mini little arsenal of conversation progression. Just headed home after a long day's work, huh? Nice. Where do you work at? Oh, that sounds cool. Did you need a degree for that? Oh, nice. Where'd you go to college? Did you like it there? Most conversations are extended versions of that, and it usually gets interesting hearing about such diverse backgrounds. About a week or so ago, this man came in. I would say early 30s, dark hair, dark features, sweatpants, a Nike sweatshirt, and hood up. It was late at night, say 9:30ish, and I was ready to close this bad boy up and get home, but had another half hour to kill. So I said, screw it, let's start a conversation with the guy. Maybe his dad is like a congressman or something cool. Hell, maybe I'll learn something from him. Holy hell. This guy was creepy as shit. He wouldn't meet my direct eye line. He would talk to me by looking above or between my eyes, and he kept his left hand tucked in the back of his pants waistline. I realize that last sentence is a bit hard to visualize, but the best visual I can give is like when people tuck a gun on the back of their pants. It was like he was clutching a gun. He kept his hand there the entire time. He was looking nervous and reluctant, as most people who commit robberies do. And as the sandwich-making process progressed, I was becoming more and more sure that I was about to be robbed. He asked for a ham sandwich on white bread. The way we lay the ham is pretty formulaic, but due to his creepy demeanor, I was admittedly feeling nervous. The 8 slices of ham ended up being folded over at different ratios, laid on top of each other sloppily, and didn't look like too appetizing of a sandwich. The man asked for Swiss cheese. The formula calls for 4 slices, so, as I always do, I picked up a stack of the triangularly cut cheese and fan it out in such a way where I can grab 4 and throw the rest back into the pile. I lay the cheese in a less than orderly fashion, and the sandwich is still clearly missing its picture perfectness that you see on TV. These details may seem irrelevant, but I just want you to know the gist of it. You'll see why. The man asked if I could toast his sandwich. This means I would have to turn my back on him for a few seconds to throw it in the toaster. I was running a lot of shit through my mind, and I was not prepared to turn my back on him. This caused a mini sort of panic, and I grabbed his sandwich and attempted to stand in such a way where I could keep my eye on him with my waist twisted enough to get the sandwich in and toasted, but still be looking at him. As you may have guessed, I dropped it. I dropped the sandwich. I made a basic attempt to catch it as it fell, kind of like flared my knee up and tried to use my waist as a sort of cushion to hold up my elbow to catch the sandwich. But to no avail. I was panicking hardcore. Splat. In the few seconds before I looked up, I was bracing myself for a very angry creep staring at me. But he was gone. He left. He vanished. I didn't even hear the squeak of the door, the footsteps, nothing. I ran outside. I looked left and right, looked left again, and no cars were driving away. No cars were even remotely parked close enough for him to be hiding in or behind. He was just gone. The sandwich was still on the ground, fallen face down. One of the triangles of cheese landed in just a perfect angular contrast with the tiles of the floor. Of the 8 pieces of ham on the sandwich, 6 were left betwixt the bread and the floor, while 2 pieces flew off and landed adjacent to the cabinet on top of which the toaster is located. Fast forward to last night. A man much older than the first comes in. I would say 60s, white hair, dark features, probably 6'6". He was probably the tall, dark, and handsome type dude in the 70s or something. Pretty nice man, up until he started ordering his sandwich. I got chills typing that last sentence because I have no idea how to proceed with the story. It just gets unsettling for me. He ended up asking for white bread. I started to carry on my casual conversation. "How's your night going, sir? Just getting off work?" The man answered with a stern affirmative and offered no other information. Okay, clearly this guy didn't want to talk about anything other than his sandwich. Weird. "What kind of sandwich for you, sir?" "Ham." All right. Pretty stern guy. No nonsense. Maybe he's like in the mafia or some shady shit, and he got nervous when I asked about work. All right, fine. Let me make your sandwich, and you can get out of here, man. He then reaches behind his waist, in the exact same fucking way the first guy did. I swear to God, the gesture and motion were the exact same smoothness, timing, and form. He kept his hand there the exact same way the other guy did about a week ago. The same way. Everything started eerily coming back to me now. It was like the most jolting deja vu moment I'd ever had, and honestly, I thought it was just that. Deja vu. But wait, there's more. The way I ended up laying the ham looked very, very familiar. The distance between each slice, the way each layer peeled off in the stack of ratio to the next, the way the slices folded over. I can honestly swear to you, I was building the exact same fucking sandwich that I built just a week ago. I was having one of those moments where a bunch of shit just passes through your mind all at once, and it's actually kind of surprising how many thoughts you can have in such a short amount of time. But I remember telling myself to take the risk and just reach for the Swiss because I had a feeling. How did you know I wanted Swiss? I was taken aback. The guy actually wanted Swiss. How in the world do I pass it off as a lucky guess? Well, exactly how you'd think. Lucky guess, I uttered as I let out a meager, pathetic little chuckle. The man proceeded to say the most spine-chilling thing I ever heard. I read stories on Reddit about paranormal or weird shit happening to people. There's actually an Ask Reddit thread about it right now. I see variations of the quote, chill down my spine, and have never really experienced that. Well, I experienced it last night. The man looks at me as if I told him I knew the winning lottery number for the next win. Very inquisitive look. A very, very strong sense of passion in his words when he said this. No. Seems like you've done this before. He just called out my deja vu. He just confirmed that he was aware of my deja vu. At this point, the phrase time traveler just made its first entrance into my mind. I looked at him with the most ridiculously awestruck impression. I sat there staring at him for a good 5 seconds before I laid the cheese. It was a surreal moment. It was like the climax of this confrontation had already happened, but I still needed to lay the cheese and veggies, roll the sandwich up, and then ring him in at the register. How much creepier is this gonna get? I just didn't get it. I picked up the cheese in the exact same way I always do. Fan out the top 4 slices and lay them down. I was looking down at the same sandwich I had built a week prior. And I swear to you, the cheese, the bread, the ham, everything was uncannily similar. I credit myself to be a rational dude, so at this point I was just calling it deja vu and not trying to feel disturbed. The man said, "Just lettuce and mayo. No toast." Not toasted. Thank the good Lord. He didn't want it toasted. This fucking deja vu is over and it's all just a coincidence, right? Well, some of you may not know, but there's this thing called a hot food tax in some places. Therefore, when a sandwich is toasted, there's a button for hot food taxation, and it's something like 12 cents. So as a force of habit, I read the order back to the customer in this fashion. "All right, sir. So a ham sandwich, not toasted, with a bag of chips and 2 cookies?" He looks very concerned with why I mentioned that it wasn't toasted. Why did you have to specify that it's not toasted? Then I explained to him what I said above, about the hot food tax and all that. Force of habit, because if a sandwich is toasted, you repeat the order like, "All right, a ham sandwich toasted with the chips and a drink," or something like that. After explaining that to him, he was just kinda inquisitive about it. Nothing too weird. I didn't want to keep him any longer, so I took his card, swiped it, and could not wait for him to get the fuck out. As he walked out the door, he looked back at me with the creepiest smile you can ever conceive in your Reddity imaginations. He turns around and says, honestly, something I don't think I'll ever forget. Just to let you know, I didn't not toast the sandwich because of the tax. I'm not that much of a cheap bastard. Okay, the guy's trying to lighten the mood, right? Sweet. Yeah, I know he's not a cheap bastard. I mean, it's 12 cents. But he felt the need to tell me the real reason he didn't get it toasted. I just didn't want you to drop it. And just like that, he was gone. This was without a doubt the most spine-chilling thing I've ever experienced. I explained this whole thing to my father, and he came up with the idea that these 2 men were probably father and son, and were just fucking with me, and I'm making up the rest of the details in my head. Impossible. Do you know why? The man who owns the restaurant I work at owns one other, just one other, halfway across town. When Guy 1 came in, I was at a store that was about 8 miles away from the store Guy 2 came in. The realistic chances of these 2 men knowing each other and tracking me down, finding me across town, and fucking with me like this is impossible. I, and 3 other employees, are the only 4 employees that jump between the 2 stores. The chances of this being a planned and methodical prank is absolutely outrageous. I have no idea what I experienced, but if you actually took the time to listen to all of this, please tell me if this is a legit glitch in the Matrix. In high school, I became close friends with a girl in my choir class. At the time, she was working evenings at a nursing home, and she was dating a guy, we'll call him Juan, who also worked at the nursing home. Juan was born in Mexico, but came to the United States as a kid. All of his family still lived in Mexico. Around Christmas, our school choir did a lot of free concerts for the public. This year, we just so happened to be doing a concert at the same nursing home where my friend worked. I was so excited because I would finally be meeting her boyfriend. Unfortunately, my friend said, Juan was going to be visiting his mom back in Mexico for Christmas, and he'd be gone by the date of our recital. Won't be meeting him after all, I thought. Now, the day of the concert arrives, and we're all at the nursing home getting our song on, and from where I'm positioned I have a clear view into the doorway that leads to the kitchen. As I'm singing, at some point I notice a Hispanic-looking guy standing in the doorway watching us. He had a baseball cap on with a very distinctive logo. At the same time that this is occurring, I was extremely strange feeling. This wave of nausea and dizziness just came over me, and I thought I might pass out. The Hispanic guy goes back into the kitchen, and the sick feelings went away immediately. After the concert, I pull my friend aside. I thought you said Juan wasn't going to be here today. Yeah, he's not. He's in Mexico. He's been there for a couple of days. No, he's not, because I just saw him. I go on to describe him, which may have sounded like a generic description of a Hispanic guy. Tan, dark hair, dark eyes, etc. Had it not been for the hat with that distinct logo. My friend verified that that's indeed the hat he wears every day to work. He's also the only Hispanic guy that works there, so it couldn't be a misidentification. At this point, I feel kind of bad for my friend because this guy clearly lied to her about going to Mexico. Then she tells me she was the one who dropped him off at the airport. Then, to completely quell any further disbelief, my friend goes and gets the manager and asks if Juan is working today. No, he's in Mexico until January 1st. Didn't he tell you? I've always been kind of sensitive to strange things, but this is beyond anything that I've ever done. I have literally no explanation, and whenever I bring it up, my friend will be like, "Can we please not talk about that?" I'll start by saying that I'm a nursing student and hospice worker, so that you understand how I know how prescribing works. Keep that in mind. I have chronic back pain, and finally, after years of suffering, I went to a pain clinic. I was prescribed 2 medications. One was a med for nerve pain, and the other was a high-strength anti-inflammatory. I took them for a few months and ran out of the anti-inflammatory, but my pain was so much better that I never bothered to get the med refilled, and eventually I lost the bottle and prescription number. Flash forward to about a week ago. My pain was getting unbearable again, and I was kicking myself for not refilling my other prescription, so I called the doc, asking for a new prescription, but according to their records, I was only ever prescribed the nerve blocker. So I called my parents bitching about how they lost or never properly charted my prescription for the anti-inflammatory, and my parents said, "You were never on an anti-inflammatory, just the one medication." I was shocked. I have vivid memories of setting up my pill regimen with 2 medications. I know I was on 2. Now, there are clearly times when you're given 2 meds but only prescribed refills for 1. Those of you who have also been under general anesthesia would know this. They prescribe you a pain med, and they also send you home with a couple pills for nausea if you need them. This was not one of those instances. I had 2 prescriptions. I filled 2 meds at the pharmacy. I had 2 pill bottles. I scheduled a reevaluation with my pain doc because, well, regardless of the craziness, I was still in pain. At the office, I casually asked her, "Hey, I was wondering, would the medication I remember being on be something we could try?" She thinks for a minute and says, "You know, we probably should have prescribed you for that the first time."